Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The Return of Joyboy by TheIntrovertRin. A story in which Luffy is the child of sea. The secrets of Luffy are unveiled slowly, which gives heart attack to people. Member list. Garrick Russell, Warlord. Black Money Young Lion, Warlord. KSG PL4YZ, Warlord. King Nemo, Warlord. Zach Travis, Warlord. Adios.
The battlefield stretched endlessly before him, covered with a vast expanse of ruin and chaos under the blood-curdling sky. Nika was sprinting, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps, his body tense, moving on instinct in a place that was both familiar and completely foreign. He didn't know why he was running or even where he was headed to, but something deep inside him screamed for him to keep moving, keep running, keep fighting. He needed to, even if he didn't know what he was running toward or from. His skin, which was usually warm-toned, was currently ghostly pale as his flaming cloudy hair that rolled above him, whipping around his face and wrapping him in a cold yet warm blanket. His scarlet-red eyes were wide, searching for any hint of what was happening, but all he could see were blurred faces, hiding behind veils of fog and shadow. The creatures around him were completely faceless soldiers who were crying out in agony and fury, despair and mocking, hopelessness and victory, filling the air with chaos. Nika's fists clenched, his rage simmering, in anger which he couldn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. His fists swung with an almost desperate fury, striking down the creatures blocking his path, daring to cross and stop him. He couldn't make out any of them, but each of his blows were charged with anger and urgency. But why was he even angry? Who were his enemies? What was even happening? Nika didn't know any of it. No matter how many foes he crushed, his rage only grew, clawing at him from inside, making his heartbeat drum louder than the cries of everyone in the battlefield. He wasn't sure what he was fighting for, he only knew that he had to keep going. Had to find something or someone. But then a familiar voice rose above the clamor, filled with worry and urgency. "Nika, watch out." Nika spun around, his heart racing. He needed to see him, but just then a blinding flash of energy erupted, engulfing everything and shifting the horizon, color and shapes, melting into something more softer, dimmer yet too painful. The cries and smoke had vanished, leaving him in his heart to feel immense sadness. His heartbeat beat louder and louder till it was the only thing he could hear. In an instant, his hands were trembling as he felt the weight in them, his heart quivering and eyes glimmering with unshed tears at the sight he was witnessing. He was kneeling down, not sure if he could stand on his legs, as in his arms lay Howid, his beloved big brother, the sky god. Howid's face was beautiful and wise like always, framed by long, flowing silvery hair, which were a cascade reminiscent of the thunderclouds. His eyes, a mesmerizing blend of gray and blue, embodying both storm and sky, clear and tranquil like dawn, were dimming now. The mischievous sparkle of life fading as he looked up at him with a mix of regret yet satisfaction. The death of Howid shouldn't be hurting him, as Nika knew that Howid would be back. His soul would be reincarnated and he would get his brother back and even get to play with him in his childish form. But this was somehow different. Everything in Nika told him that this would be the last he would be ever seeing of Howid. "Please, don't," Nika choked out, his voice cracking, his throat tight as he held Howid's body closer to him, not willing to let his brother go. He didn't want to. "Nika, my lil brother," Howid whispered, his voice weak but full of warmth as he rested his hands lightly on Nika's arms and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "I didn't want you to be burdened with this." "No," Nika's heart wrenched with guilt, his own hands pressing down as if he could keep Howid here with him, but he could see how Howid was turning fainter and fainter with each passing moment. "It just should have been Emmy. Please, don't leave me." "Shush, it's okay. I'm happy. You're okay. And safe." Howid's smile never faltered, even as his trembling hands brushed over Nika's cheeks, wiping his tears. "I don't regret it. My power. My duty. It is yours now, Nika. You will guide the skies as I did. For us both, won't you, lil brother?" Nika's breath caught in his throat, the weight of reality and realization finally striking him full force. Howid had taken the blow meant for him. An attack meant to destroy a god's essence, not just body but the very soul, leaving nothing to reincarnate or salvage. An attack that would destroy the very fabric of a god's being. Howid had sacrificed himself, allowing Nika to remain untainted by those wicked grasps. Howid's hand slipped to Nika's shoulder, his bluish-gray eyes dimming with each word. "This way. You will never be alone. I will be with you, in every gust of wind. Every storm, every day. And night. My powers will keep you from feeling lost, from ever feeling alone again, and tie you to this very planet like you always wanted." Howid chuckled softly, his chest rumbling as he coughed up blood. Nika's eyes welled up with newfound tears as Howid pressed his hand over his heart, the remnants of his power surging into Nika's very being. The warm and vast energy like the summer sky coursed through Nika, blending with his own strength, spreading warmth within him. Nika's scarlet eyes shifted to make space for gray and blue, as he felt the weight of Halad's domains, sky, weather, storms, flow into him. Halad, please. Don't go. Don't leave me. Nika's voice was barely more than a whisper, his face streaked with tears he couldn't hold back. But Halad's smile only softened further as he pulled Nika for one last hug. The world. It is yours to protect now, Nika. Be strong, for both of us. And remember, you will always have a piece of me with you. I am glad to see why you safe in my final moments. And with that, Halad's form dissolved, scattering into thousands of glowing particles, swirling around Nika like a final embrace. No, Nika cried, reaching out, desperately to hold on to even a fragment of Halad's presence, but it all slipped through his fingers, merging with the winds that now whipped through the empty battlefield. Luffy jolted awake, his heart hammering against his ribs as the nightmare lingered like a shadow, wrapping tightly around his mind. For a moment, he felt trapped between the worlds, the real and the imagined, but the soft snores of others and his own frantic heartbeat brought him back to the room, infirmary, and to reality. He could feel them, his crew, Ace, Sabo and Bonnie. All resting, their exhaustion clear as a bright day with their every breath. They had all fought so hard, been through too much. Just because he wanted them to fight without him, for him. Luffy felt a sob rise in his throat, but he pressed his trembling hands over his mouth, forcing the sound back down. He can't wake anyone. He can't let them see him all weak and fragile anymore. He can't wail here. But the urge to break down, to cry out, to shout and scream out due to the death of. It was too overwhelming. It hurt and he knew he couldn't hold down the dam for too long. He couldn't stay here. Not here, not where they'd see him shatter and break down. Moving carefully and silently, he slipped from the bed, careful to avoid making even the slightest sound. He slipped out of the room and made his way out through the silent palace, each step heavy with the new reality crashing in his soul. He had to get out. He needed to breathe, to be somewhere without walls or people, where no one could witness his grief. Luffy made his way out through the quiet palace, guided by the gentle beckoning of the winds, wrapping around him, as he wiped his own tears and tried his best to keep himself quiet. His bare feet threaded through the corridors, climbing the palace steps towards the open air, until he reached the very top, under the endless, dark, night sky, filled with stars like scattered jewels. Luffy barely noticed the beauty of the night sky, his gaze drifting to his hands, which were shaking and ghostly pale as that day under the moonlight. His knuckles wetted them too hard, the memories of his nightmare pulsing painfully throughout his mind. Halad's voice, clear yet weak, warning him, holding him, even in his. With a choked sob, he slammed his fist into the stone ledge beside him, a sharp crack echoing as the stone shattered under his knuckles. Thunder rumbled above, clouds threatening to clash with each, and the winds picked up their pace, mirroring the storm raging within him. He hadn't even noticed the cracking energy in his hands until he saw it sparking, flaring wildly as his emotions slipped past his control. Halad, he whispered, his voice a fragile, broken plea as the sky lit with distant flashes of lightning. Hot tears traced down his eyes, his heart weeping with the pitter-patter of the raindrops which tried to wash them away. "I am so sorry." He was back there, in that final, brutal moment, desperately trying to hold on to Halad's fleeting presence. Luffy's vision blurred as he sank to his knees, clutching at his chest, feeling the weight of guilt like a crushing tide. Memories of the time, of every instance, he had tried to reach out to his brother, to talk to him, unknowing of what had occurred, and even going as far as refusing to acknowledge the quiet cues of his other siblings whenever he asked about Halad. It all flooded back to him, making him feel terrible. The winds were growing restless, howling around him in a violent swirl as his grief laid open for nature to witness. I'm sorry. Luffy whimpered. For all the times I didn't listen. For ignoring the sorrow of the winds. And the others. I never thought. His voice tailed off, breaking as he struggled to contain his tears and flood of memories. It had all happened because he was distracted, angry and careless, not seeing the danger aimed right at him. Why? Luffy quivered, his whole body racking with uncontrollable sobs that wrecked out of his throat, his arms hugging himself as his eyes clenched shut. Why? Halad. It should have been him. It was all his fault. Shish. Don't cry, lil' brother. I don't like seeing tears in your eyes. Halad? Luffy's glimmering eyes instantly snapped open, gray and blue ringed around his red and golden irises, desperately looking for the source of the voice. He knew it was his heart and soul, playing back the memories of Halad comforting him, accompanied with the winds that were encompassing him with an old, familiar hug. It felt too surreal, yet he knew that the reality was different. That the world was devoid of Halad. But the words replaying in his mind were the truth. Halad hated to see him cry, he hated to see him sad. I am sorry. Luffy whispered to the knight, his voice barely audible as he wiped his tears and clenched his fists. He took a shaky breath, feeling the winds ruffle his hair gently. It almost felt like Howid himself brushing them along with his tears. Luffy swallowed hard, the last of his tears falling as he looked to the sky with a determination held tight in his soul. He'd protect them all. His friends, his family. He wouldn't lose anyone else because of his mistakes. Drawing a deep breath, Luffy finally managed a shaky, tear-stained smile as he gazed up to the night sky. "I promise Howid, I'll be strong. And won't let anyone else die." The storm above quieted, and the clouds parted their ways, allowing moonlight to spill down upon him. The winds whistled happily, singing a gentle hum as he leaned back on the cold stone, his exhaustion catching up with him and allowing his heavy eyes to drift shut. His breath became steady, finally calming down as the winds softly whispered one last message from Howid before Luffy fell into a deep, dreamless sleep under the protective watch of the stars, sky and winds. "You are not alone. I'd never leave you to face the world on your own." As the sun just barely peeked over the horizon, Luffy was already up and moving quietly through the palace halls with his arms full of bags and crates overflowing with fresh ingredients he had managed to gather before anyone else stirred awake. He was following the haughty signature of the king with a determined look. With a wide, eager grin, Luffy knocked on King Cobra's big door, causing a sleepy guard to open it and blink in confusion at the sight of Luffy and the pile of raw food in his arms. May I help you?" the guard asked, trying to hold back a yawn. "I need to talk to the king," Luffy said, his voice barely above a whisper, but his grin was so wide it practically gleamed. The baffled guard re-entered the room and returned with a somewhat drowsy King Cobra, who was adjusting his robe as he took in the sight of Luffy with a curious smile. Luffy's face lit up even more, and he immediately presented the stack of ingredients with a wide, hopeful grin. "What is all this?" Cobra questioned uncertainly, as he rubbed his drowsy eyes and noticed the impressive collection of ingredients piled in the young teen's arms. "These are for breakfast," Luffy declared cheerfully, dumping the ingredients with a gentle nonchalance on the ground. "I want to thank everyone for fighting so hard, so I wanted to cook everyone's favorite meals for them. But the last time I cooked, Ace and Sabo refused to have a bite of it. And I got banned from the kitchen by Dad and Kuma-san. So you had to help me." The king, though bewildered at the rumble of words, chuckled, grasping exactly what would have happened for the teen to be banned from the kitchen. But there was another thought which struck his drowsy mind. The wordings of the teen. They clearly showed that the teen has some connections with Kuma-san, which might suggest that he has connections with the Revolutionary Army. But that was also clear the previous day when Kuma-san was keeping a close worried eye on the teen and knew about him being Saira. "Well, Luffy," Cobra started, ignoring his thoughts and realizations, as his hands stroked his beard thoughtfully, masking the little smile tugging at his lips. "I don't know much about cooking either, but I think I know just the person who can help." With that, he led Luffy to the bustling palace kitchen, where Terracotta, Igaram's wife and the palace's head chef, was starting preparations for breakfast. Luffy was quick to shove the ingredients to the head chef, excitedly bouncing on his toes as he listed everyone's favorite dishes to her. "Oh my, you collected quite a rare and wide variety." Terracotta awed, her eyes wide as she recognized some of the ingredients to be not even available in Alabasta, like the fruits which only grow in Autumn Islands, the sea king meat, and many others. A part of her wondered how the young teen got his hands on them. "I want to make sure everyone has something special to eat after yesterday's hard work," Luffy grinned brightly. "How thoughtful, I will be honored to make this feast." Terracotta patted Luffy's shoulder before quickly setting the kitchen staff to work and guiding them as they began chopping, cooking and stirring up the massive array of meals. While the crew was still sleeping, the delicious smell of cooking soon started to waft through the palace halls, stirring them awake one by one, only to be led to the dining hall by the guards or maids stationed just outside the room for security. Ace and Sabo were the first to rise up, followed closely by Bonnie, each of them practically floating towards the scent which were calling them, leading them to a long table which was being set up with platters of food which included their favorites as well. Everyone was soon to join in the dining room, a look of surprise and gratitude flashing on their faces as they were guided to their seats. The maids were darting in and out of the kitchen, each carrying dish after dish, each one of them more tempting than the last, while the palace guards looked on in a wary amazement at the sheer amount of the food being brought out. When everyone was finally seated, the doors opened and Luffy came in with a proud expression on his face and a big smile on his face. He surveyed everyone with his eyes, CHECND, noticing how happy each one of them looked at the sight of their own favorite dishes. "Everyone," Luffy clapped his hands joyfully, garnering attention to himself. "Thanks for all of your hard work," he announced, practically bouncing with excitement. "Eat as much as you want. This is a celebration for everyone," he spoke, lifting a glass with sake in his hand, leading everyone to the celebrations and cheers. "Kanpai," everyone cheered, drowning their respective sake, except for Bonnie and Chopper, who just tasted a bit before placing the glasses back, and finally digging into the food with enthusiasm and urgency. "Eat as fast as you can before the food disappears." Usopp warned the king, seeing how he was shocked and bewildered at them for stuffing their faces as fast as they could. He couldn't blame him, considering he knew nothing about how the food battle can ensue when it involves Luffy. But right now on the table were Ace, Sabo and Bonnie too. Having witnessed the way the siblings eat in their 2 days journey together, Usopp can for sure as hell say that if anyone gets between them and doesn't protect their food, they're going to be hungry. Don't worry, there's still plenty left. King Cobra spoke with a sweat drop, witnessing the sight of stretchy limbs sneaking food from other plates, only to get stabbed by forks or get swatted. The feast, renamed as the chaos which was occurring, was truly something out of horror books for the guards who were infuriated at the shouts, indecency of their diners, not to mention how a few of them were standing on the table to snatch their food back from the hands stealing them. "Oi, Luffy, you took that from my plate," Sanji was the one who shouted half-heartedly, wanting the meat back from Luffy who stole it from his plate, but it was in vain as Luffy was quick to stuff it in his mouth with a giggle. Sanji discreetly smiled as he had known that Luffy would do this and hence had hid vegetables in the meat discreetly. Undeterred, Luffy continued reaching for food, stretching his arm all the way across the table to snag a particularly large piece of meat. Ace and Sabo noticed and immediately tried to intercept him, laughing as they turned it into a playful wrestling match over the food. Bonnie, catching on, quickly snatched the meat for herself, grinning as she held it above her head in triumph. Ace groaned. "Bonnie, not fair," he laughed, playfully pulling her into a headlock as Sabo joined in, making the whole table burst into laughter. Across the table, King Cobra watched the chaotic but joyful scene with awe and fascination after his bewilderment and shock subsided. He chuckled to himself, his eyes falling on Luffy, who barely looked older than 13 or 14, was stuffing his face eagerly. But with years of experience, he can see that the kid was not eating his fill, allowing his friends to swat or stab his hand, when he can easily make his way out and get the food he was aiming for. He could see the way the teen was being considered for everyone. But it shouldn't be possible, right? With Luffy being Red Maniac, Syra and one of the members of the feared 3 Cs, shouldn't he be more cruel and gruesome? Isn't Syra's name and fame always shrouded with fear, destruction and mystery? Yet, here was the teen, his eyes sparkling with warmth, humor and playfulness, laughing like a kid without a care in the world. Cobra was truly struggling to associate or even relate such a cheerful, reckless kid to the same person the world painted as a terrifying enigma. Moreover, the words which Syra or Luffy had told to Nico Robin stuck him. The knowledge which he showed and knew, far surpassing his age and mind, was terrifying and was indeed destructive if it fell on wrong hands. But he doubted if the teen would ever be one of the suspects to know the knowledge which no one might know in the entire world. He has several questions which he would like to ask Luffy himself. The meaning of the letter D which they both shared and the importance of the poneglyph which was Alabasta's royal family's duty to protect. For a brief moment Cobra saw Luffy's eyes flicker to him, a small smile stretching across his features as he won the turkey which he was playfully fighting for with his brothers. It was only for a brief moment until Luffy's eyes darted towards Usopp, with a pout on his face, as a new banter started. In that short moment, Cobra felt as if the teen somehow knew what he was thinking. But it wasn't possible, right? It has to be his brain refusing to not link the image of Syra with Straw Hat Luffy. But Cobra knew that in reality and to those close to Syra or Luffy, he was just a kid full of life and love, radiating like a sun in even the darkest times. As the chaos unfolded, the males moved swiftly, bringing in additional trays and dishes, replacing them with the empty ones, to keep up with everyone's appetites. They were especially bewildered to see how fast the food was vanishing from Luffy, Ace, Sabo and Bonnie's plates. The maids exchanged amused and determined glances, trying their best to keep up with everything, and ignored the still offended glances of some of the guards who were still annoyed at their guests. At the head of the table, Vivi laughed as she shared a dish with Nami, both of them amused by their friend's unbridled enthusiasm. Zoro muttered something about needing more sake, even though he had already finished 2 barrels already, while Usopp animatedly gave Chopper a lesson on how to keep his food secure from the grabby hands of Luffy. Kuma, who was sitting beside Bonnie, holding his plate protectively against the stray hands and making sure that the self-proclaimed siblings don't really break into an all-out food fight, glanced over at Cobra and gave a polite smile. "Apologies for their behavior, Your Majesty." He spoke with a warm, nervous smile. "They're all lively to say the least." He was kinda embarrassed how everyone on the table, except the king and him, were acting as people not having seen food for ages, but everyone's happiness and enthusiasm was truly warming his heart. "No need to apologize, Kuma-san." Cobra replied with a warm smile, as he leaned on his hand to observe the commotion. It was indeed a lively one, spreading joy. Also, it has been too long since the palace had been filled with so much laughter. Kuma smiled and returned to Cobra's answer and continued with the meal, leading Cobra's mind to wander once again. The government's stories had painted Kuma as a tyrant, but none of the actions of the man had suggested any violence since yesterday till now. In contrast to Kuma's terrifying stature and stoic face most of the time, Cobra could tell that he was serene and too gentle. Cobra wondered if the government's tales were merely an exaggeration or perhaps there were layers of Kuma's story which even the government didn't know, or were hiding, not letting the public know. Turning his attention to Sabo, Cobra recognized the blonde-haired man from Vivi's letters, who had helped her in making plans. He was the chief of staff of the Revolutionary Army, an organization often branded as dangerous and treacherous, to which Kuma also belonged and perhaps his daughter too. But looking at them right now, laughing freely and enjoying the day, and how they had helped in saving his country and had given a hand to his daughter, it was hard to imagine them as an enemy to the world. Perhaps there was more to the Revolutionary Army's cause than the government admitted. It was possible, after all, the government and the Revolutionary Army were enemies. And then there was Fire Fist, Ace, who has been rumored to have strong connections with the Three Seas and formerly with the Whitebeards. Considering Luffy being Syra, the connection of Fire Fist with the Three Seas were believable to him, but the news about Ace's betrayal to the Whitebeards didn't make any sense to him. Especially seeing how he was cherishing his siblings and even letting them snatch food from his plate, it was truly hard to believe Fire Fist as a man who would use a bond to free the Whitebeard pirates from within. The speculations of Morgan on how Fire Fist was waiting for the perfect time to weaken the Whitebeards by feigning alliance truly sounded wild and crazy right now. Cobra would have scolded himself for making speculations on the pirates and revolutionaries solely based on how they were behaving right now. But Cobra knew that food is a way to reveal a person's true personality, especially when they are deeply passionate about a particular food or when presented with unfamiliar culinary experiences, as it can trigger genuine reactions and behaviors that might be hidden under their usual facade. That's why Cobra knew that none of the people sitting with him on the table weren't genuinely criminals at heart. But that meant that the government was deliberately obscuring the truth, which wouldn't be unthinkable especially after yesterday. He still wondered why the government would ban people from learning about the true history of the world. Why would they put a bounty on a child, only 8 years old, only for knowing a language long lost to the world, which would help in deciphering the history? Moreover, Morgan truly was high up making crazy theories based on almost nothing. Cobra's chest felt heavy at that. Perhaps, it wasn't just the world's criminals he should be cautious of, but also the voices that claimed to know them the best. By the time the food from the table finally disappeared and everyone's stomach was filled, new antics were already on move. Starting with Usopp's performance of balancing several stacks of plates on his nose, Chopper with chopsticks deliberately stuck between his nose and mouth, Luffy and Bonnie dancing on the table, and peals of laughter and clapping from the others. Even the palace guards were unable to control their laughter, as they burst out laughing with everyone at their saviors' and country's heroes' antics. But that wasn't the end of the joyful day, as the feast was soon followed by an exuberant bathhouse, where every one of them got to relax their tired bodies, laughing and splashing each other with warm waters. Cobra, sitting among the other occupants in the male section of the bathhouse, felt himself smiling with contentment. He watched as Luffy splashed his brothers and friends, grinning ear to ear, his innocence and joy visible for everyone to see. "Thank you," Cobra spoke softly, bowing his head, leading the whole room to fall silent. Whoa, is it alright for a king to do something like that?" Zoro muttered, his eyes narrowing as he took in the king's solemn posture. "This is a grave act, your highness. The king should not lower his head to others," Igaram insisted, alarmed at the sudden words and the posture of the king. It was more alarming than a moment ago, where the king had told the perverts where the women's baths were once asked. Cobra, in turn, shook his head, his eyes lifting to meet theirs. "Igaram, rank is worn above one's clothing. But here, in this bath, there is no such thing as a naked king." Cobra argued calmly, his lips forming a soft smile. "As a father and a resident of this land, I'd like to express my gratitude." The weight of Cobra's words hung in the air, and Luffy's playful expression softened as he listened like the others. It wasn't a title speaking to them but a grateful heart, and even the dumbest ones gathered there seemed to understand that. Thank you, everyone." Luffy laughed warmly, his voice breaking the warm, comfortable silence which had followed. "It's no big deal, old man." Across the room, the others nodded, agreeing with Luffy. The group tried to stay out of the eyes of the Marines who were stationed outside the palace, waiting for a chance to capture any of the pirates or revolutionaries gathered inside. But due to the royal guards stationed outside the palace, staying stubborn on their false claim that no criminals were inside the palace, the Marines were not allowed entry, even when the Marines saw some of them talking casually in plain sight. "Hey, Lou, Bo, Bonnie," Ace called out, spotting his siblings near the palace. He ran towards them, ignoring the startled looks from the Marines he passed by, perhaps deliberately walking a little too close to tease them. "I found Deuce," he said with a grin, giving his brothers a wave. "We will be heading out soon." "You came to say goodbye?" Bonnie asked, her expression softening but tinged with a hint of sadness at the thought of their impending separation. But it wasn't like they wouldn't meet again or stay in touch, but parting ways were never easy. "Yep." Ace's grin widened. "The sea's calling and I have got a traitor to find." His expression darkened for a brief moment, a flicker of anger and hatred crossing in his eyes. He wasn't going to let that bastard Teach get away with what he'd done. Ace, Luffy's voice was calm, but it carried an uncanny seriousness that made Ace stop in his tracks and divert his attention solely to his brother. Don't go after Teach. Luffy's eyes flickered to golden, locking with the steely ones of his brother. Normally, Luffy would never interfere with his siblings' plans, no matter how dangerous or stupid they were. But there was something in his gut, something deep and instinctive, that told him if Ace went after Teach, something devastating would happen. And Luffy knew, deep down, he would hate it if something truly wrong happened to his brother. He would never forgive himself if he lost another one. Ace startled at Luffy's words, his body going rigid for a split second, as his silver eyes felt stuck to Luffy's, which had changed to golden, steady and intense in a way that Ace had only seen a rare amount of times. It was the kind of look that demanded more than just a casual response. But Ace had been preparing himself for this confirmation for a long time. But Luffy, he was never wrong about these things. His mind felt torn between the burning need to make Teach pay for his actions and Luffy's plea. Ace started, his voice suddenly feeling stuck in his throat. He turned his head slightly, forcing himself to not look into Luffy's eyes, aware that his resolve would crumble to pieces if he stared too long. I know. He knew that Luffy was trying to protect him from something far worse than the revenge he sought after, the golden eyes enough to make Ace reconsider, but the thought of Teach's betrayal still ate at him. But I can't just let him go, Lu. Ace spoke, his voice low, and knuckles turned white. Luffy's eyes softened, understanding flickering in them, but he remained undeterred. He knew how important a family is for Ace and how betrayal hurts him worse than any one of them, but Luffy didn't want Ace to go after Teach. Ace, just promise me you won't go hunting for him. Not yet. Please, Ace. He didn't want to lose another brother. He didn't want to hold Ace's dying body in his hands. No, he absolutely cannot. Please, Ace. The nightmares of Howid dying were resurfacing, glistening his eyes slightly. The presence of his siblings and crew had helped him stay strong till now, but now having the gut feeling that history might repeat itself. Luffy hated it. Ace opened his mouth to retort to Luffy's words, not seeing the tears glimmering in Luffy's eyes, but Sabo chose to step in. Ace, Luffy's right. We get it. You want to make Teach pay, but chasing after him is useless. Sabo said, forcing Ace to look at Luffy. Ace's heart lurched as he saw Luffy wipe his eyes, trying to play it off as if it hadn't happened, but the tension and sadness in his baby brother's face was impossible to ignore. Ace's resolve shattered and his stomach tightened. He opened his mouth to comfort Luffy, but all his words faltered. How could he keep on insisting on revenge when Luffy was so much saddened by the mere idea of him doing so? Sabo's voice cut through the suffocating silence. Ace, please. Sabo's tone wasn't angry, it was calm, but it carried worry and concern for both of his brothers. You know it wasn't your fault. Thatch is alive and recovering. You don't need to go after OWS, that Teach could have planned this all. For having someone chase after him so that he can strike and turn things to his favor. Otherwise, why wouldn't he have just stolen the devil fruit when no one was looking? Chasing after him won't do anything. Ace wanted to retort, to say that he couldn't just let Teach run amok, but none of them made their way out. The expectant and worried eyes of Sabo, Luffy and Bonnie wouldn't let him speak those words. Fine. Ace exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. I won't go after Teach. I won't search for him actively, but if we cross paths then I am not letting the chance to punch his ugly mug. He looked at Sabo, Luffy and Bonnie, noticing the reluctant yet satisfied agreement. I can live with that. Luffy shrugged with a smile on his face. That's the Ace Nicken we know. Bonnie clapped her hands, grinning. Try talking to Thatch sometimes. He tried to call me once again. Sabo faked a groan, knowing well enough that Ace considered Thatch as one of his best friends. It would be good for Ace to talk to Thatch and stop chasing Teach. Everyone could clearly tell that Ace isn't handling this well. His mental state was terrible when they met after a while, even if he tried to put on a fake smile for Luffy. They both knew they couldn't hide basically anything from Luffy. Moreover, Ace losing track of his crew and being separated? That was a cover and each of them knew, but none of them showed that they did, letting Ace keep up the facade, knowing that he needed his time with his family and closed ones. When are we heading out? Zoro asked, leaning back with his arms crossed, as he glanced at Luffy with a subtle worried look. He noticed the way Luffy seemed to be just a little quieter, a little more distant than usual, even if he was really masking it way too well. He would have thought that Luffy was sad about the fact that his siblings had left him for the sea, but that was not, and Zoro knew it. There was something more which Luffy was hiding, not willing to tell anyone. Soon, I think. Sanji replied when Luffy didn't reply, seemingly lost in his own world, gazing at the starry sky with his legs dangling on the other side of the window. He was getting worried, nervous in fact, at how Luffy's pale skin seemed to be getting more and more paler with each day and night. Was Luffy eating enough? Was he once again starving himself consciously? Sanji didn't know, but the thought of Luffy doing that churned and rattled his stomach in wrong ways. Can't risk lingering too long with the Marines getting antsy each day. But Sanji didn't care much about the Marines. They needed to go back to the sea, so that Sanji could provide Luffy with sufficient food to fill him. It wasn't like he wasn't eating here, but truthfully, Sanji had not seen the teen have a single morsel of food after their grand breakfast. Vivi's hands trembled slightly as she clutched the edge of her seat, hearing Nami and the others agree on leaving soon enough from her country. She had been dreading this moment, unsure of her decision. She wanted to go with her friends, have adventures in the seas and be with them. But she also has duties as a princess. The last 2 days were truly enough to allow her to come to a decision, but no matter how hard she thought about it, she found herself stuck in the middle, unable to understand what she truly wanted to do. "We have already recovered enough to sail on, right, Chopper?" Nami questioned with a smile to Chopper as her eyes fleeted to Luffy for a second, seeing his slumped shoulders and gaze fixed at something in the night sky. She might not always observe Luffy for his oddities, but the obvious loss of his energetic self was painfully visible to her. But maybe it was due to Luffy being stuck on the land and not on the seas because of them recovering. That seemed a plausible reason for Nami, as she hoped that traveling and going for the search for the next adventure might uplift Luffy's mood. She would do her best to guide them, Nami swore to herself. Vivi's lips wobbled at Nami's agreement. She knew that she needed to speak, that she needed to make her decision, but. "Yes, we are ready to head out," Chopper excitedly answered, having checked Zoro's, Usopp's and Nami's injuries this evening. They were the ones mostly injured except Luffy, who had been evading his tries on getting a proper checkup. Everyone has truly recovered, but Chopper worried about Luffy's pale face. "Jigai," Vivi's voice was like a silent whisper which started, but before it could finish, a sharp ring of Luffy's Denden Mushi rang through the air, making everyone finally notice Luffy move to fetch the snail from his pocket and turn towards them. For a moment, Zoro noticed the emptiness in Luffy's eyes before joy and happiness erupted from those very eyes. Even Usopp noticed how Luffy's hands slightly shook before getting a hold and stable. Usopp had noticed others throwing subtle glances at Luffy, and he knew that something was wrong. "But it's Luffy we are talking about. He has to be fine. Nothing can be wrong with him." Usopp was painfully aware of the lie he conjured to keep his mind sane, but if something was truly wrong, then he will be right by his friends and captain's side. "Hello," Luffy spoke in his casual happy self, his smile stretching wide and making his eyes squint at that. "Luffy," Sabo's tense and urgent voice came from the snail. It almost seemed like he was in a really tense situation. "Just wanted to give up a heads up. Marines are swarming Alabasta's ports and are stationed at the mouth of the Sandora River. They're putting a lot of effort into stopping anyone from leaving." Luffy's giddy face finally settled into a normal smile as he nodded, as if he already knew it, while Nami, Usopp and Chopper froze at Sabo's warning. Panic flashed across their faces as the reality of the situation sank in them. They absolutely cannot stay for long, if they do not want to get caught by that insane Smokey guy. "WW8, Marines?" Usopp squeaked, flocking to Luffy with Chopper and Nami. "Every port," Chopper's voice wavered as he glanced at the snail nervously, wanting and wishing Sabo to say that he was joking. "But our ship is stationed in Aramula and there is no active port there yet, so he can escape, right?" Nami questioned, hoping Sabo would just say yes to her, but alas, her luck wasn't too great. "Sorry Nami, but they are specifically looking for Going Merry," Sabo answered. "Luffy, you guys, need to leave immediately." Sabo knew that Luffy could easily handle the Marines, but there was something else going on with the Marines. The Marines are acting suspiciously. "Got it." Luffy let out a small sigh and disconnected the call, slipping the Denden Mushi back to his pocket. "Everyone," Luffy commanded, standing straight and looking at each one of them, his gaze lingering onto Vivi's nervous, hunched-up form for a minute before he spoke. "We are leaving now. Pack up." The Straw Hats leapt into action, grabbing their belongings and shoving them hastily into their bags. They worked in tense silence, each of them aware that any delay could mean capture. Luffy sat beside Vivi, as his bag was already packed, not needing to stuff anything more. "Vivi, have you decided?" Luffy questioned, his voice barely above a whisper, as he observed his friends dance around the room to get their things. He belatedly realized that he needed to ask them about how their fights went and more, but it could wait for now. Though, he hoped Zoro and Usopp were healed enough to head for their new adventures in the sea. After all, his mother could be merciless sometimes. Vivi pulled her legs to her chest, plopping her head dejectedly on her knees. "I don't know what I should do, Luffy," Vivi cried, a silent tear slipping from her eyes. "It's okay," Luffy answered, his gaze lingering on her friends and his hand petting Karoo, who was nuzzling him. Vivi and Karoo are always welcome aboard. Luffy smiled softly at Vivi before getting up, as everyone had packed their bags and were waiting for him. "Right, guys?" Luffy asked, knowing that everyone present in the room had heard their little conversation. "Yeah, but we also need to leave the country, so there is only a little time for you to decide, Vivi." Nami spoke with a sigh. Everyone in the room nodded with her statement. "We'll give you 12 hours to decide." Nami's tone was firm as she spoke. "Once we secure our ship, we'll approach the eastern port exactly at noon tomorrow." We probably won't be able to drop anchor, so if you want to continue traveling with us, that'll be your one and only chance to get on board." Nami's firm tone softened a bit as she further added, "This time, though, we'll welcome you as a pirate." In the heart of Mary Joieuse, inside the Pangea castle, the 5 elders were kneeling before the occupant of the empty throne, Emu. "Straw Hat Luffy is becoming a problem," Imu-sama, one of the elders, wearing a black suit, spoke first. Despite his very young age, the kid has recently defeated Crocodile in his own stronghold. He also wields the Gomu Gomu no Mi that we have failed to secure countless times regrettably, another white-bearded elder spoke, his mouth suddenly going dry. Though as of yet we have no indication he's awakened it. His recent feats are impressive, but they lack the telltale signs of an awakening. The elder pondered on the report of Crocodile still laying unconscious and stated to remain so for more than a week. The strength in that kid was truly remarkable and they shouldn't let it slip from their hands. If we were to install him as one of warlords, we'd have an oversight of his actions as well as control over the fruit should he ever awaken it. Another elder with a scarred face leaned forward, his eyes sharp, as he suggested, having him under our command would neutralize any potential threat while allowing us to control over the sun god Nika without much work. Emu, seated above them, their majestic figure convulsing with shadows, let out a nerve-wracking snort. "Nika is long gone." They spoke, their voice making the 5 elders shiver and keep their mouth tight shut. "Only his devil fruit remains, and that too, I shall control. The boy, Monkey D. Luffy, is nothing but a vessel, a mere child without any understanding of the power he holds." "Exactly, your majesty." The elder with the white beard nodded. "If we bring the kid into the warlord, we can groom him to be our weapon." The other elders nodded in unison at the suggestion, waiting for Emu to give their final verdict. "Extend the child the offer to the position of the warlord." Emu gave their orders, their pointy fingers tearing through the smile of the very child and the bounty poster in their hand. "I want the child as one of the 7 warlords in my game," Emu ordered, thinking about how the 200 million belly child with that unforgiving devil fruit would be soon under their command. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale glow casting light over the vast desert waters of Alabasta, and on the Going Merry, where inside Robin sat quietly in a dimly lit cabin. Her long finger resting idly on the spine of an old book she had picked up from the ship's modest library. She wasn't reading even if her eyes were glued to the book. Her thoughts were somewhere else, swirling around the curious boy who had offered her something no one else in her life ever had. Hope. Monkey D. Luffy. Or rather, Red Maniac, Syra. Robin's lips quirked into a faint, bemused smile. It was hard to reconcile the image of the straw-hatted boy, barefoot, bright-eyed and brimming with childish determination, with the whispered tales of the enigmatic Red Maniac. Yet, the way he had spoken to her in the ruins of Alubarna. His words had been neither naive nor aimless. He had spoken as though he knew the very secrets she had sought her entire life. "The true history," Robin murmured under her breath, her voice soft in the stillness. How does a child of his age come to possess such knowledge? She wondered. It wasn't even like the pirate was bluffing to her. No, something in those eyes of Luffy said that he knew the history way better than anyone could. He had even seen through her so easily, offering her not escape but the one thing she couldn't resist. The answer she had dedicated her life to uncovering. Robin leaned back in her chair, her sharp mind churning about the mysteries related to the Straw Hat Captain. Monkey D. Luffy being Syra was also something to ponder. The stories of the 3 seas and their great yet notorious endeavors were not something to scoff off. The power, the devastation and the chaos which they made in the past and Cyane still does. Everything led Robin to wonder how much power Luffy has. How much does he know about the secrets of the world government and further? Was it all a lie? Her musings were interrupted by an odd sensation. The ship was swaying slightly beneath her, as if it was carried by the winds to somewhere else. They must be back, Robin thought, stretching out her arms and making a crisscross, activating her devil fruit powers. A pair of eyes instantly bloomed on the deck above her, scanning the ship for the Straw Hat crew. But the deck was eerily empty, devoid of anyone. Robin frowned. Her additional limbs dispersed as she ascended to the main deck herself. The Going Merry creaked gently, the anchor inexplicably raised and the sails fluttered as if responding to a will of their own. Robin reached for the railing, her sharp eyes scanning the sand surrounding them, but there is no sign of the Straw Hat pirates. Robin strode to the helm, gripping the wheel firmly. She couldn't let the ship drift in the seas on its own, not until the crew was back. "What's even going on here?" Robin muttered, her calm voice betraying a hint of irritation. Robin braced herself, trying to regain control of the ship, but the wind seemed to push against her efforts, carrying the ship further into the dark seas. Robin's grip tightened on the helm. This was no ordinary occurrence. The Going Merry was moving without direction, without anyone steering it, unless, of course, the ship was haunted. Robin's thoughts were interrupted as the ship came to an abrupt halt. The sound of wood scraping against stone echoed in the stillness. She steadied herself, her gaze snapping to the starboard side. Jagged rocks jutted out of the sea like sentinels, halting Mary's progress. Robin exhaled slowly, her sharp mind assessing the situation. The rocks had saved the ship from drifting further, hiding it from prying eyes and potential threats of Marines discovering it. But this also created a new problem. The Straw Hats, wherever they were, wouldn't be able to find their ship where they had left it. Convenient, Robin murmured, her fingers drumming against the railing as she stared at the looming rocks, but also troubling. Robin turned her gaze back toward the desert, her thoughts briefly flitting to the boy who had already confounded her expectations in so many ways. Was this his doing as well? The wind tugged at her hair, carrying whispers of the unknown. With a resigned sigh, Robin leaned against the helm. Your ship is also a strange one, Straw Hat Luffy, Robin said softly, her lips curving into a faint smile. Stranger than I anticipated. For now, all Robin could do was wait. Wait for the crew to return. The moon hung high above the Alabasta desert, casting a glittering over the sand which trickled past the Straw Hats as they raced through the desert on spot-built duck squad. Ah, the beauties of Alabasta. So many lovely ladies, but sadly we had to leave so soon. Sanji sighed dreamily, his eyes sparkling at the thought of the ladies and maids who were serving them in the palace. Oh, how he would love to stay there one more night. It's a tragedy really. A handsome guy like me deserves more time to impress them. You didn't impress anyone, love cook. Zoro mumbled, rolling his eyes at the poses the cook was striking. All you did was swoon and carried trays of food around the palace like a love-struck waiter. Sanji's head snapped towards Zoro, his duck wobbling slightly from the sudden movement. Shows what you know, Mosshead. Unlike you, I actually appreciate women. Sanji pointed out the times Zoro kept on lifting weights and swinging his sword, even when Chopper forbade him to. What did you say, you swirly brows? Zoro retorted with a tick. Will you two shut up already? Usopp groaned, throwing his hands up. Some of us are trying to survive this ride without falling off. It would have been Nami, who would have stopped the banter between Sanji and Zoro most of the time, but she was unusually silent and had barely even spared a glance at them as she kept her duck steady. Nami, are you okay? Chopper questioned, tilting his head in concern at Nami, who had a really downtrodden expression on her face. You're thinking about Vivi, aren't you, Nami? I understand how you feel, but it's not something we can do anything about. Sanji questioned with a worried glance at Nami. We had a lot of good times together, but that's just how it is. Come on, cheer up now. I am not sad about Vivi. Nami spoke, shaking her head. But I guess I should give up for Vivi's sake, at least on the 1 billion Baileys. You damn well better. Zoro, Sanji and Chopper shrieked while Usopp's duck came to a sudden stop, causing him to tumble forward in a flurry of limbs and sand. AAGHH. Usopp fell off, Chopper shouted. Let's just keep moving, Nami stated, rolling her eyes as Usopp scrambled to get back on his duck, muttering about feelings and empathy. As they continued riding, Nami eventually frowned and pointed. We are not heading in the direction of the shore where we left the Mary. Luffy, where are we going? All eyes turned to their captain at the front of the group. The moonlight bathed Luffy's form, his pale, glowing skin looked ethereal under the night sky. His straw hat cast a faint shadow over his face, but the light gave him an otherworldly presence that made the crew pause. The Mary isn't where we left it, Luffy said, his voice steady but quiet, as he looked forward towards the horizon. It's somewhere else. What do you mean, somewhere else? Zoro asked, squinting at him. Zoro knew that Luffy would lead them to the right place, but still seeing Luffy so down, he didn't know what to do, say or do. I just know, Luffy replied simply, not looking back at them. He had asked the winds to carry Mary to a safe place after Sabo had warned him about the Marines looking for her. Just know, huh? Sanji muttered. You're not gonna give us any hint? Nope, Luffy replied with a grin, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. The crew exchanged glances but didn't push further. Luffy was unpredictable at the best of times, and if he said he knew where their ship was, they'd have to trust him. Luffy, Sanji called out, unable to suppress his growing concern over his captain. You were eating back at the city, right? Sanji questioned Luffy, having not seen Luffy most of the time in the palace. He knew that he has out with his siblings and having fun, but did Luffy have any food? Or even some food out there? Probably. His siblings won't let Luffy starve himself. So, why was he so pale? Sanji's right, Luffy. You look so pale. Are you sick? Chopper asked after Sanji. He had wanted to address the issue, but every time he gathered his courage to ask Luffy about what was bothering him, he couldn't. Something within him just refused to ask questions to Luffy whenever he saw his face. You've been off since we left the palace. Zoro added, his tone faked nonchalance, but Zoro was concerned. If one looked closely at Luffy, then they can easily tell that something was off with the team since the fight. Luffy leaving the guest room in the middle of the night, nowhere to be found until he appeared before his siblings or the crew. It wasn't too un-Luffy-like, but it bothered Zoro. If something's wrong, you can speak to me, speak to others, if you want. I'm fine, everyone, Luffy answered quickly, his grin reappearing as he waved a hand. I'm always fine, guys, don't worry about me. The crew wasn't convinced. They could clearly see that Luffy was lying. He telltale signs of not even looking at them when lying and slight sweat trickling down his temples. The Straw Hats exchanged worried glances, each one wondering if they should further press Luffy on the matter. For Luffy, the cold desert air, the winds, the clouds, the sky, the light humid in the air. It was all suffocating, grasping his throat in their icy fingers, cutting off his supply of air. Everything and everywhere he ran his gaze reminded him of his beloved late brother, Howid. Luffy really tried. He was really trying too hard to divert his attention from that, but the ache wouldn't leave. Being with Ace, Sabo and Bonnie earlier had been a welcome distraction, but now the grief crept back in, heavier than before, carving his heart ruthlessly. It wasn't like that the presence of his crew wasn't helping, it was helping. The silly banter of Zoro and Sanji, Nami's sadness hidden by the grief for money, Usopp chattering on and Chopper listening. It really lessened his grief a little, but it wasn't enough. Before long, they reached the shore and dismounted from their ducks.
"Where is the Mary, Luffy?" Usopp questioned, scanning the horizon, but there was no sign of their beloved ship. He didn't want to think for a moment that Luffy would take them to the wrong place, knowing his ability to find anyone and anything instantly, but still.
"There is Mary." Luffy pointed, happily skipping from the rocks and pointing towards the mast of the Going Mary, which was peeking out from behind tall rocks.
Before anyone could wonder how Mary got all the way over here, Luffy spoke up, "Let's set sail, guys."
Marine Headquarters Sengoku's office. Fleet Admiral Sengoku sat in his chair with a grim expression as he shuffled through a stack of reports. Across the desk, Garp lounged casually, munching on a packet of rice crackers with the carefree air of someone blissfully detached from reality. Sengoku's left eye twitched as he watched crumbs of rice crackers litter his desk. "Garp, for the last time, will you please take this seriously?" Sengoku groaned, slamming the stack of papers onto the desk with a loud thud. The 3Cs, the Straw Hat Pirates, the Spade Pirates, and the Revolutionary Army. All in Alabasta at the same time. That's not just bad luck, it's a coordinated nightmare. Garp paused mid-bite, eyeing Sengoku lazily. "Hey, sounds like a coincidence to me," said he. "You know, people bump into each other in strange places all the time." He shrugged, popping another cracker into his mouth as if they were discussing the weather. But in reality, Garp was well aware that it was all very much planned because someone decided to be depressed and kinda suicidal. He also wanted to join in and punch some sense into his eldest grandson, but he first needs to settle his scores with Newgate. Sengoku glared at him, his patience wearing dangerously thin. "Coincidence? You honestly expect me to believe that your grandson, Monkey D. Luffy, just happened to wander through the desert, defeat Crocodile, and team up with the revolutionaries and the captain of the Spade Pirates?" Garp scratched his cheek awkwardly, feigning confusion. "Huh? My grandson? Are you sure about that?" It was these times when Garp was always relieved that Sengoku didn't know about his connection with Ace and Sabo. "But you know what, Garp? This time your grandson isn't even the main problem, at least not for me." Sengoku spoke, rubbing his temples and remembering the order of the 5 elders to offer a position of warlord to Straw Hat. Sengoku truly hopes that the kid takes it without a fuss. "Then why are you whining like I ate your hidden stash of rice crackers?" Garp questioned, going for the last packet of rice crackers, which Sengoku was quick to snatch away from him. "Be serious for a second, Garp," Sengoku chided Garp, emptying all the crackers in his mouth. "Can't you see what's wrong? Can't you understand why the Marines are getting antsy?" Sengoku questioned Garp, as he nursed his temples. There was only one member of the 3Cs left on the seas to spread terror and steal the classified Doans, with Syra having disappeared suddenly some weeks ago and Cole not seen for years. But now all 3 are back. They're back, Garp. "Cole is not dead," Sengoku groaned, wanting to just retire. He really didn't want to rack his brain for all the Doans that will be stolen and the Marine bases that would be raided. "That can't be so bad now, Senny," Garp laughed loudly, hiding the grimace of Sengoku wanting his little grandsons dead. He didn't like the sound of it. "Whose side are you even, Garp?" Sengoku slammed his palm on the desk, glaring at Garp. "Garp, you're acting like this is just another ordinary day at the office. Do you even understand the magnitude of this situation? 3 billion berry bounties don't just reappear overnight." "Wait, 3 billion berry for some kids who run around causing trouble?" Garp questioned with wide eyes, leading Sengoku to throw the 3 updated bounty posters at him. Garp truly had to rub his eyes, his chest swelling with pride and a smile spreading through his face. His brats truly have done it. With Cyan having a bounty of 1,230,000,000, Syra with 1,320,000,000 and Cole getting a whole 1 billion. Garp was sure his grandsons would be over the moon at the bounties on their head. "Kids," Sengoku jabbed a finger in Garp's direction, not believing that his best friend would call such notorious S-bags kids of all things. "Syra is known as the Red Maniac. He's WR and left a trail of chaos wherever he goes. Cole, the Orange Wrath, obliterated battalions of pirate ship in a single day himself before going off the radar for years. And Cyan, the Bly Sly, that conniving menace has outwitted entire battalions of Marines, stealing the classified information and left us chasing our tails more times than I can count. He paused, taking a breath and hating the losses the Marines have encountered just because the fucking 3 Cs. Now all 3 of them are back, together. This isn't just trouble, it's a disaster waiting to happen. Garp scratched the back of his head, trying to feign ignorance while masking his unease. Well, maybe they're just having a reunion? You know, catching up with old friends? Sengoku slammed his palm on the desk, making the Doans scatter. This is not just a reunion, Garp. The amount of damage they've caused, financial, structural, and logistical, had pushed the Marines to the brink. Resorting to the PPP, it doesn't help that the leader of the 3 Ps is someone masked, charging stupidly high prices for simple gadgets even. Even the 5 elders are breathing down my neck, and all I get from you is shrugs and empty wrappers of my rice crackers. Garp chuckled awkwardly, reaching for another rice cracker, only to remember Sengoku had already stolen the last pack. Well, you're the fleet admiral. I'm sure you'll figure something out, eh? Sengoku's eye twitched. Oh, I figured out something, alright. The 5 elders want Straw Hat Luffy offered a warlord position. So, that's one menace down. Garp froze mid-laugh, the carefree demeanor slipping for just a fraction of a second. A warlord? Luffy? His tone stayed casual, but the grip on his chair tightened slightly. That kid's a free spirit, Sengoku. Don't think he'd take too kindly to being anyone's lapdog. Moreover, if by chance Luffy ever personally came before the 5 elders, then he was dead meat, which he refuses to ever happen on his watch. That's what I'm worried about, Sengoku muttered. It's a strategic move. If we can get him to accept, we can keep an eye on him, and, more importantly, on that devil fruit of his. Devil fruit? Garp feigned ignorance again, tilting his head while his hands twitched slightly. It's just some rubbery stuff, ain't it? Doesn't seem all that special. Sengoku gave Garp a suspicious glance but didn't press on further. There's something strange about that fruit and the 5 elders are adamant about keeping it under Marine control. If he's not a warlord then he's a target. And with the Straw Hats getting tangled up with First Fist and Revs in Alabasta and Luffy standing before the 3 Cs without flinching. These all are blurring the lines in ways that couldn't be accepted. Garp. You're overthinking it, Senny. Garp clenched his fists but forced a laugh, his booming voice masking the creeping dread in his chest. He couldn't imagine how things went this downhill all of a sudden, but knowing Luffy, there was no chance of him accepting the warlord position. But that doesn't mean Garp wanted Luffy to get a huge target painted on his back this early. His crewmates weren't ready for this. Oh, and then there's Fire Fist. Sengoku continued sharply, gaining full attention from Garp. Some sources suggest that he's Gold D. Roger's son. Garp choked violently, coughing into his fist as he stared at Sengoku with wide eyes. How is it possible? He and Dragon were extremely careful about letting any news about Ace spread, especially anything relating him to Roger. So how? Who did it? That's absurd. That kid's only 20 this year and Roger died 22 years ago. It's not possible, Senny. Don't try to fool me, Garp. Sengoku snapped. He was angry at not knowing how the spawn of Roger was able to evade their grasp for so long. He didn't really need Garp trying to save his long-dead pirate friend's son, on top of this all mess. Now that Whitebeard has evidently kicked out Fire Fist after he betrayed them, we have an opportunity to bring him in. The world can't afford to let him roam free. Garp's carefree facade slipped slightly as he clenched his jaw. Senny, you can't chase after rumors. Even if he isn't related to Roger, Ace is tied to the 3 Cs. Sengoku ignored Garp's words as he continued. Bah! Garp interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. You're chasing shadows and baseless rumors. Senny, the 3 Cs and Fire Fist are not tied. Don't try to lump everything together, it'll give you more paperwork. Sorry, Garp, but this time I'm not listening to you. Sengoku spoke, getting up from his chair and leaving the office. As the first rays of the sun blessed the waters and the Going Merry finally emerged out of the mouth of the Sandora River, long shadows of fleets of marine ships encircled Going Merry from all sides, leaving not a single escape route for Going Merry. This is it, we are done for, Usopp shrieked, running around in circles like a headless chicken on the deck. They've surrounded us completely. There's no way out. Nami gripped the railing, her eyes scanning each side to retreat, but there was none. We have faced worse. Zoro spoke, his hand instinctively going to his swords to defend and attack at any moment. Yeah, Usopp piped up, though his voice wavered at the sight of the marine insignia on the sails. 80 ships of Baroque works. We handled that just fine, even if Usopp knew that it was only possible because Zoro and Luffy were absolute monsters and Sanji had their back. But it wasn't any different this time too. The monster trio will obliterate the Marines with no problem. Sanji lit a cigarette, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. That was different. Those were hired thugs. These are Marines, with discipline and training. And more importantly, they have surrounded us completely. If we attack one ship, others will shoot at us. The best option in this is to stay on defense and find a way out of this cage, Nami stated, doing her best to find at least one flaw, one opening for their ship to pass through. Wait, is that Smoker? Sanji questioned with wide eyes as he looked at one of the ships to find Smoker and another beautiful woman standing beside him. And it's not just Smoker. There's another marine captain commanding the fleet, Chopper stated, his ears dropping as he peeked over the railing. They've got us boxed in, Zoro muttered, his eyes darting around. Usopp sank to his knees, clutching his head. We're doomed, completely and utterly doomed. Pull yourself together, Usopp, Nami barked, though her own nerves were fraying. Luffy, what are we going to do? We are surrounded from all sides. The Going Merry wasn't a ship built for naval battles, especially not with the Marines who could start showering cannons at them any moment. With only one cannon attached to the main ship and the other loose cannon, they were a sitting duck. The memory of their battle with the Baroque works flashed in their minds, as they looked at Luffy, who was standing high on the yardarm with a determined gaze on his face. The formation in which the Marines have surrounded them in, didn't faze Luffy at all. With one command he can shred the ships into pieces and sink them all. With one request he can send them to their deaths, but Luffy didn't want to. Not yet. The kind Marine like his grandpa was here in one of the ships with anticipation and worry leaking from him. Before any of the Straw Hats could start outlining any escape plan, a loud voice, coming from one of the Marines' ships, interrupted them. Pirate Monkey D. Luffy. A cold, authoritative voice rang out, coming from a Denden Mushi attached to a speaker. You are hereby offered a position as one of the 7 warlords of the sea, effective immediately. Accept and you will no longer be pursued as a criminal. You will also be allowed to leave with your crew, safe and sound. The normal letter will be. With every word of the offer being spoken, Nami, Usopp and Chopper's face gained color and hope built in them while Zoro and Sanji stared at Luffy, who Washi's straw hat casting a shadow over his face. Zoro and Sanji wouldn't even be able to tell what was going on with Luffy if not for dark clouds to suddenly cover the skies and the winds to pick up the pace, whooshing and tearing through the sails of some of the marine ships. Even the water below them was churning as if responding to Luffy's anger. Hell, no, Luffy shouted without a moment's hesitation. He had listened more than it was required. What the hell were the Marines even thinking about him? Thinking that they caught him? That they have the upper hand? That they can contain Nika? Him? Luffy, you idiot, Nami wailed, throwing whatever she could get to the teen who was standing high above. You could have lied until we left this freaking formation. Yeah, what's wrong with taking a little break or telling a lie? Usopp joined her, tears streaming down his face. I don't want to be anyone's lapdog. Luffy remained unmoved, his grip steady on the rope. Smoker's brow furrowed as he listened to the exchange. When he was told about this new situation with the higher-ups also giving him the credit for defeating Crocodile, Smoker didn't want Luffy to accept it. Smoker didn't want Luffy to accept it, knowing all warlords are crooked, which could have ruined the kid's innocence. But right now, the idea of Luffy becoming a warlord seems to be the best option, with him being cornered for his piracy and hunted like a criminal. Moreover, if the kid becomes a warlord, then he might be able to sway him, get him to see the truth about piracy and rescue him from his bad influences. Then, maybe, Luffy would agree to join the Marines even. Luffy, Smoker spoke, his voice cutting through the verdict the higher-up was about to throw. Think about this carefully. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? This isn't just about you anymore, it's about the lives of you and your crew. I already declined, Smokey, I am not going to be a warlord. I will be the king of the pirates and the freest man in the universe. Luffy shouted back at Smoker, knowing that his intentions were right, but he wasn't that weak to kneel down to the world government. Refusal to comply will leave us no choice but to escalate. The marine speaker connected to the Denden Mushi came to life again, with the voice having a sharper edge than before. By order of the world government, you will be designated a priority target and hunted accordingly. Marines, prepare to attack. Before the sentence could be completed, a massive fireball exploded across one of the marine ships, sending it into chaos and finally creating an opening in the marine formation. Don't you dare touch my little brother, the Spade Pirates ship roared into view, its black sails cutting through the dawn like a shadow. Ace stood at the helm, a confident grin on his face as flames licked at his fingertips. You heard Luffy. He's not interested. So, get lost before I burn the rest of your ships to cinders. Ace. Luffy's face broke into a wide grin as he watched his brother and his crew leap into action. Nami and Usopp froze mid-sob, their tears instantly replaced by joyous relief. Thank you, Ace, Nami cried, throwing her hands into the air. You're a lifesaver, Usopp added, his previous terror now replaced with celebratory fist pumps. Anything for my baby brother. Ace lifted his cowboy hat and waved at them, before shouting orders to his crew. Spades, fire. We need to make a way for the Going Merry. Cannon shots, gunfires and flames erupted from the piece of spadil, which was outside the Marines' formations in instant reach, forcing the Marines to scatter and break their formation and giving Merry a chance to escape. Thank God for sending Ace, Chopper and Usopp cried, holding each other as Nami handled the rudder and steered the ship towards the eastern port. The priority of the Marines had shifted dramatically with a supernova worth of 900 million berry in the fray. Will Ace be okay, handling the battalion of Marines? Sanji questioned Luffy, as he adjusted the ropes properly. Ace will be fine. Luffy answered, already feeling the Marines going down and just a little ahead, Sabo standing as a backup. With Ace having his crew and Sabo, the Marines can't do any harm to them. The Going Merry rested motionless upon the gentle, lulling waves, with its sails furled and its anchor conspicuously absent. Despite this, the ship felt oddly stable, almost as if the sea itself held it in place, refusing to let it drift away. The Straw Hats stood gathered on the deck, tension rippling through the group as they prepared for what lay ahead. They had narrowly escaped the battalion of Marines, their ranks poised to attack, only to be intercepted by the sudden arrival of the Spades pirates, led by none other than Luffy's brother, Ace. For now, the Marines had been held at bay, but the crew's reprieve felt fragile. The eastern shore of Alabasta stretched out before them, their destination tantalizingly close. The Going Merry was buzzing with anticipation and excitement as they waited for their friend to show up. Yet there was no sign of their friend, Vivi, whose absence was beginning to weigh heavily on them. "We can't drop the anchor here," Nami declared sharply, leaning against the helm. Her expression was grim, but voice firm. "If the Marines catch up to us, we will need to leave quickly." Moreover, glancing at the horizon, showed the smoke from the fight ensuing and going on with the Marines and Ace's crew. "We might not have time," Nami added, a touch of worry creeping into her tone. "They're bound to break free of Ace's hold soon." It wasn't as if she didn't trust Luffy's brother, who outright has to be a monster for Luffy to not win against him all the time, but it would be best for both the Spades and them to leave as soon as they can. "And yet, the Merry isn't moving," Sanji remarked with his brows furrowed as his gaze drifted over to the unusually calming waters. "It's like the sea itself is holding us here." Sanji inhaled on his cigarette, exhaling a stream of smoke as he hesitantly glanced at Luffy. "Or maybe it's just Luffy using his wind powers to control the ship," Sanji muttered, remembering Luffy's will and control over the weather. Zoro stood apart, leaning against the mast with his arms crossed but his sharp eyes trained on Luffy, who stood silently near the bow. For all the chaos and noise around him, Luffy's stillness was unnerving. Zoro hadn't missed the way his captain had been acting since the fight with Crocodile. There was a mix of quiet determination right now, which was far better than the almost haunting emptiness that didn't sit well with him. "Vivi, are you there? Say something?" Usopp's voice broke the silence. He was shouting with his hands cupped around his mouth as he called out over the water. "Isn't it Vivi's voice?" Chopper asked, his sharp ears twitching as he caught the faint traces of Vivi's words coming from within the island. "It's the broadcast snail," Nami explained softly, her expression clouded. "It's being broadcasted across the entire island for the coming-of-age ceremony." Nami's voice faltered, even if she tried to smile through her sadness. With every moment passing, it was becoming really obvious that Vivi was not coming. Maybe she truly was not going to come with them. "Vivi's coming," Luffy said suddenly, cutting through their doubts. His tone left no room for argument. Standing at the railing with his hands gripping it tightly, his gaze remained fixed on the shore. The Straw Hats exchanged glances. They knew Luffy's abilities, his mastery of observation haki and detecting people from far, which was uncanny, but a flicker of doubt lingered in their hearts. Was Luffy stating a fact to make them feel better, or was he trying to reassure himself? Meanwhile, from Alubarna, Vivi's voice came to life, crackling across the transponder snails placed throughout the island. Her words echoed over the bustling capital, the previous rebel camps, and even the deck of the Going Merry, louder and clearer than before. "I went on a little adventure. It was a trip in search of despair across the dark, gloomy seas. Having left my home country, the sea I then saw before me was vast. It was hard to believe just how many strong islands there were out there." It was Vivi's voice, which was soft yet powerful, filled with a mixture of longing and hope, traversing through the entire island and reaching the crew on board Merry, freezing them as her words washed over them. In the palace, King Cobra leaned back in his chair, a proud smile gracing his weathered face. He had always known Vivi was strong, but hearing her voice carry across the island filled him with pride, a feeling of joy to have raised such a wonderful daughter and future queen of Alabasta. Beside him, Igaram, disguised as Vivi in a ceremonial robe, stood swiftly. Though his posture remained formal, a small, proud smile tugged at his lips as he listened to the princess's heartfelt words. "Plants and animals I had never seen. Sights I'd never imagined even in my dreams. The music of waves was quiet at times, gently washing away my trifling concerns. At other times, they were fierce, laughing to tear apart my timid feelings." On board the Merry, Nami gripped the railing, her knuckles white. "She's grown so much," Nami whispered, her voice breaking slightly at her friend's recounts. "Vivi's so amazing. She really is a princess." Chopper sniffled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I am not crying, it's just the wind," Usopp cried, wiping his eyes, which were filling up with tears incessantly. Sanji took a drag on his cigarette, his face obscured by the smoke as he spoke. "Our Vivi. She's shining brighter than ever. And in the midst of a dark storm, I came across a single small ship. The ship pressed me onwards from behind and said, 'Can't you see that light ahead?'" In the rebel camp, Kuza lay on a cot, listening intently. Though his body was bruised and battered and aching, a faint smile graced his lips. He closed his eyes, letting Vivi's words wash over him. The mysterious little ship that never lost its way in the darkness crossed over monstrous waves as if dancing, never defying the sea, and yet the ship's bow always heading straight ahead, even through headwinds. And then it points a finger out. "Look. The light is right there." The people of Alabasta were getting confused with each word, thinking what their princess was speaking in her coming-of-age ceremony, but none of them raised their question. Those who knew, listened with undivided attention at the bravery and adventure which was sure to be passed in the generations ahead. History may call this a myth, but to me, it is the truth. And so, the transmission trailed off, leaving the Straw Hat Pirates suspended in a sea of emotions, confused and aching from the speech. They were coming to a realization, which they should have realized far earlier. Maybe a part of them knew, Zoro's and Luffy's most probably did, but none of them were able to cast aside the weight of Vivi's words that were sinking into their hearts. Her words, despite being beautiful, carried a weight that none of them could ignore anymore. "Vivi's saying her goodbye," Nami whispered, her voice trembling with sadness. "Don't go sprouting stuff like that, Nami," Usopp's voice wavered. "No way, she is not coming. No way. That's just her voice. She's coming. I know it." He turned to the others. "Stop being so dramatic. We need to wait for her." "Yeah, Usopp's right." Luffy's voice was firm, his eyes never leaving the shores. "Vivi's coming." Luffy repeated the word, getting worried glances from the crew. The crew turned to their captain. His certainty was infectious as always, leading them to keep watching the shore for any signs for Vivi. But before they could, a cry came from behind them, prompting them to take notice of their unexpected guests. "Marine ship spotted," Zoro called from the mast where he had climbed to keep watch. "What?" Nami gasped, rushing to the other side and grabbing a telescope. Through the glass, she saw a lone marine vessel breaking through the waves towards them. Smoke and minor damage to its hull suggested that it had slipped away from the grasps of the Spade pirates. "They must have followed us from the other side of the ISL, reaching for his lighter. Looks like we've got some cleaning up to do." Zoro smirked, cracking his knuckles as the Going Merry was steadily turned to face the Marines. Luffy didn't participate in the fight, knowing full well that one lonesome marine ship could be easily handled by even Usopp himself. Thus, he kept his attention on the hockey signature of Vivi and Karoo, who were traveling through the desert to reach them. The Straw Hats were quick to spring into action with Zoro and Sanji prepared for a possible fight, Usopp already holding onto the cannon ready to shoot, while Nami and Chopper worked to steady the Merry. But before any of them could engage, a familiar figure finally appeared on the horizon, making Luffy grin wide. "There!" Luffy shouted, pointing towards the distant shore where Vivi descended from Karoo and waved her hands at Luffy. "Vivi!" The Straw Hats called out in excitement and relief, seeing their friend finally here. Vivi held the transponder snailed tightly in her hands, her eyes looking at her feet before she gathered her strength to face her friends. "I can't come with you." Vivi's voice cracked as she uttered the words which were quick to dishearten the Straw Hats and herself. "But I want to thank you for everything until now." She spoke, uncaring and forgetting about the other people who were hearing her confession on the island. The Marines aboard the pursuing Going Merry trained their binoculars on Vivi. Confused murmurs were rippling through their ranks. "Isn't that Princess Vivi? Isn't she supposed to be in the ceremony in the capital? Why is she here?" Vivi's voice was cracking and tears were slipping from her eyes as she continued speaking. "I'd love to go on another adventure, but I can't. Because, you see, I love my country too much. That's why. I can't come." The words were spoken with conviction, though her tears betrayed her inner conflict. "Although I'll remain here now, if we meet again someday. Will you call me your friend one more time?" Vivi questioned, smiling through her tears. From the deck of the Going Merry, the crew watched Vivi, their hearts aching at the decision which Vivi came to, but they knew it was inevitable. Luffy stepped forward, ready to shout, but before he could, Nami smacked him on the back of the head. "Don't," Nami hissed, her hands grabbing Luffy's. "The Marines are watching. If they hear us, Vivi will be branded a criminal. And her life as a princess and the future queen will be threatened. Let's say our goodbyes in silence." Nami patted Luffy's back. Luffy clenched his jaw but nodded, holding back his words. There was nothing they could do now that Vivi had made her decision known. But they were still friends and would be until death pries her from him, just like his friends. Turning his back to the shore, Luffy raised his left arm high into the air. One by one, the crew followed suit, their long sleeves slipping from their arms to show the criss-cross marks on their skin, which gleamed and glowed in the sunlight. A silent vow of friendship that needed no words. "Thank you." Vivi, seeing the gesture, broke into a tearful smile and raised her own arm in return, her mark matching theirs. "Thank you, my friends. Let's go," Luffy finally said, his voice soft but commanding as he turned towards the marine ship, where the marines were in a pinch about Vivi and her connections with them. "Let's set sail. Looks like the marines aren't chasing us anymore," Zoro speculated as his sharp eyes scanned the horizon. Indeed, there wasn't a single marine ship in sight, not even the one that was chasing them for a while, before going down in flames and, mysteriously, engulfed by raging waves. "Aha!" Luffy, Usopp and Chopper echoed absent-mindedly. "We really managed to get them off, huh? Right, guys?" Zoro smirked, pleased that everything had gone accordingly and without a hitch. "Aha!" This time it was Luffy, Sanji and Nami who answered, while Usopp and Chopper sank into a gloomy silence. Geez, Zoro's sweat dropped, his patience waning at their uncharacteristic lethargy, especially the childish trios. Luffy, Usopp and Chopper were always smiling and playing around. Not sulking like this. What's up with all the lifeless replies? "I miss her," Chopper, Nami, Sanji, Luffy and Usopp wailed in unison, as tears streamed dramatically as they turned their sorrowful gazes toward the distant Alabasta. "Stop weeping. If you didn't want to part with her that much, we should have just dragged her on board by force," Zoro barked, his bluntness making no effort to sugarcoat reality. He knew that the morons knew that being moppy about this wasn't going to help, but they still were acting way too childish. "How barbaric," Chopper gasped, scandalized at Zoro's emotionless answer. "Could you be any more heartless?" Nami snapped, her glare sharp enough to cut through Zoro currently, that is, if glares could do so. "Marimo," Sanji growled, instantly squaring off with Zoro. "Three swords." Luffy chimed in as if hurling an insult, at least he tried to do so. "Three swords isn't an insult, Luffy." Usopp corrected Luffy, once again realizing how naive his captain can be and definitely is. "Four swords." Luffy corrected himself with confidence, which was once again a failure. "How's increasing the number supposed to make it any worse?" Usopp exclaimed, completely bewildered at Luffy's naivety. He couldn't believe that this was the same guy who had the audacity and guts to utter, "son of a bitch," back in Yuba to a fucking sandstorm. Fine, fine. Cry as much as you want," Zoro uttered, not wanting to be the center of Luffy trying to insult him and failing repeatedly. These were the times when he really wondered how could his captain even be a god with such a childish mentality. Like, aren't gods supposed to be too powerful and super intelligent and wise due to them living for centuries and all? But maybe Luffy was a baby god compared to others? That seemed plausible, but Luffy's absurdity was surely a Luffy thing. Zoro realized with a resigned sweat drop. But he was happy to see Luffy finally looking light and expressive about his feelings. "Seems like we finally left the island. Well done." A calm, unfamiliar voice interjected Zoro's thoughts, as sounds of footsteps clattering out from the women's quarters in the ship was heard soon after. "Yeah," Zoro replied absent-mindedly, his back facing the woman until he froze at realization and his instincts kicked in. Whipping around, with his hands flying over his sword, he stared in shock at the woman who was casually strolling on the deck. The rest of the crew even turned as one, staring at the mysterious woman in stunned silence. "Here to avenge your organization? Fine. I'll take you on," Zoro shouted, unsheathing his blades in a flash and pointing them at the women, daring her to even take one step closer to any of them. "What are you doing here?" Nami shrieked, clutching her head in panic, unable to comprehend how an enemy was among them and no one had commented on it, until the enemy announced her presence. "Oh my, such a lovely lady," Sanji gushed, hearts bursting from his eyes as he ogled their unexpected guest like a creep from top to bottom, already ready to noodle his way to the woman if not for Nami's hand to hold onto his shirt's collar and restraining him. "Enemy attack! Enemy attack!" Usopp wailed, trembling as he hid behind the mast, desperately shouting through his makeshift speaker. He desperately wished that Ace was still lingering around them and would tackle down the creepy woman. Chopper screamed, hiding behind the mast only for most of his body to remain outside of his hiding place. "Who's she?" "Oh, finally decided to come out, Robin." Meanwhile, Luffy greeted the enemy with a carefree demeanor and his signature grin. "You knew she was here?" the Straw Hat Pirates collectively bellowed, with their teeth suddenly forming sharp edges and veins to pop as they directed their glares at their oblivious captain. But that of course, Luffy would know that she was here of all places. "How long has she been on the ship?" Nami demanded, her eyes locked onto the enemy as if she expected her to vanish or attack them if she looked away. "For a while now. I was busy reading and taking a shower until now." Robin replied calmly, her serene tone completely mismatching the chaos erupting around her. Her face didn't even show the disappointment to the harsh words which were thrown at her. She was accustomed to it. There was no reason for her to believe that the crew would be chill with their former enemy. All she needed was the knowledge which Luffy has, and if they're caught, which she doubts would happen, She can always bail out in exchange of revealing Sire's identity. What are you up to, Baroque works? Nami shouted once again, not willing to let her guard down around the woman. Not for a single moment. Monkey D. Luffy. Robin said, ignoring the others and focusing her piercing gaze to meet Sire's, only to get a smile darting to something akin to threat spread on the teen's face, startling her for once and warning her to not speak or do anything that would lead the teen's wrath on her. You haven't forgotten what you did to me, have you now? She questioned, hesitation flickering clear in her mind but refusing to surface. She needed to remind the teen that she was only here with him for her gains. For the thing he promised her and nothing more. What you did, Luffy? What the hell did you do to this fine lady? Sanji yelled, lunging at Luffy to grab hold of his collar. Only for Luffy to slip away from Sanji's wrath and ponder what he had done to Robin. He hadn't kicked her ass, so what was she even blaming him for? Disembark immediately, Usopp, hidden behind the mast, shouted through his speaker. I never did anything to Robin. Luffy pointedly answered, dodging Sanji's grasp with practiced ease and hiding behind Zoro and away from Sanji, who was mad at him for doing anything with their unexpected female guest. Oh no, you committed an unbearable act upon me, Robin stated, letting a small, enigmatic smile tug at her lips. She wasn't sure if it was due to the amusing sight in front of her or her facade. Nonetheless, she leaned casually on the railings and looked straight at Luffy. For which you must take responsibility. Who's she? What's going on? Chopper questioned, not feeling any more fear but rather confusion. Leave at once, or we will call the Marines, Usopp shouted through his speaker, continuing on with his antics while Luffy darted around Zoro, grinning as if this was all a game with Sanji hot on his heels, demanding to know what sin he has committed by offending a beautiful lady. I don't understand your words, Robin. Luffy called out, frowning in genuine confusion at Robin's puzzling words and how eager was Sanji to wrest the truth by getting at him for whatever he has done. Robin, meanwhile, unbothered by the chaos she'd caused, gracefully walked toward the railing and smiled softly. My answer is yes. She answered finally, her voice smooth as she reached into her satchel, retrieving the eternal pose to dusk and throwing back to the kid captain. Luffy's eyes lit up as the confusion bid him goodbye. We got another crew member, woohoo, Luffy cheered, his voice bursting with joy as he began bouncing and dancing around the deck in celebration, soon to be joined by Sanji, who instantly switched gears at the realization, and joined Luffy in his euphoria, shouting praise to the heavens for blessing them with another beautiful goddess on their crew. Both of them remained completely oblivious to the mounting tension oozing from the rest of the crew who stood frozen in shock and disbelief, watching in horror and partly understanding of the current situation. What the hell? Usopp screamed, tears cascading from his eyes as his jaw dropped to the floor. His mind was literally a mess of fear as it raced, trying to piece together that an enemy had just waltzed into their ship and was accepted with open arms by Luffy, their captain, who was completely trusty and naive. What if the woman has ulterior motives? What were they gonna do if she was aiming to kill them in their sleep? You can't call in an enemy, Zoro barked at Luffy in frustration, only to fall on deaf ears. Clenching his fists, his first instinct was to show Luffy how wrong his decision was on this one. Even for a god like Luffy, he was being incomprehensible, not seeing how disastrous his decision could be. Don't worry, Robin's not a bad guy, Luffy said nonchalantly, flashing his signature grin as if that one statement answered everything. His answer, like always, was unhelpful. It's not helpful at all, Usopp snapped, throwing his arms in the air before collecting himself. He turned his gaze to Robin, who was sitting casually on a chair, her hands folded neatly on the table and her smile mysterious. Well, if Luffy's answer is useless, I'll do it myself, Usopp declared, puffing out his chest and sitting across Robin. Let's start with the basics. Who are you and why should we trust you? Usopp questioned, his eyes trained on Robin while he belatedly noticed Sanji dashing off to the kitchen to prepare snacks for the beautiful lady, Zoro leaning down on the mast with his ears trained on the convo and Nami taking a seat on the stairs. Since I was 8 I have been an archaeologist, Robin replied, her smile not at all wavering. At that age, I also had a bounty placed on my head. It's been 20 years of living on the run from the Marines. Archaeologist? Usopp asked, tilting his head. He couldn't help but wonder why Luffy would pick up an archaeologist for their pirate crew. It's a family trade, Robin explained. But a child can't survive the seas alone. So, I lived under the care of various villains, following their orders to survive. In doing so, I became skilled at moving behind the scenes. Such skills could prove useful for your crew. Usopp rubbed his chin, narrowing his eyes. You sound confident. What would you say is your specialty? Assassination, Robin uttered with an amused smile. Usopp froze, his eyes widening. He turned to Luffy, flailing dramatically. Luffy, after careful investigation, I've concluded this woman is way too dangerous, Usopp shouted, scrambling away from Robin as fast as his shaken body could do. Luffy, however, wasn't paying attention. He had climbed to his usual spot on the Mary's figurehead, gazing out at the endless horizon. His grin had faded, replaced by a far-off look. Even though he was elated a few seconds ago, his thoughts couldn't help but drift to Halad's death, Ace, and everything else. It felt slightly heavier than before, now that he could finally see his mother. He has countless questions which he couldn't wait to ask her but couldn't right now. Zoro, despite keeping a sharp eye on Robin and half listening to Robin's interrogation, noticed the shift in his captain, his hunched shoulders as if carrying burdens and his lack of energy. "Luffy!" Usopp shouted again, but the captain didn't respond. Luffy, however, wasn't paying attention. He had climbed to his usual spot on the Mary's figurehead, gazing out at the endless horizon. His grin had faded, replaced by a far-off look. Even though he was elated a few seconds ago, his thoughts couldn't help but drift to Halad's death, Ace, and everything else. It felt slightly heavier than before, now that he could finally see his mother. He has countless questions which he couldn't wait to ask her, but couldn't right now. Zoro had taken a seat nearby, arms crossed, watching the exchange closely. His grip on his swords remained firm, ready to draw them if Robin gave even the faintest hint of danger. Despite his vigilance, his attention occasionally flickered to Luffy, who sat perched on the Mary's figurehead, gazing silently at the endless ocean. "What's up with him?" Zoro frowned. Luffy, who usually inserted himself into every conversation with boundless energy, was unusually quiet. His posture seemed relaxed captain better than that. The furrow of his brow and the distant look in his eyes betrayed the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in his mind. "Luffy!" Usopp shouted again, but the captain didn't respond. Zoro's jaw tightened as he shifted his gaze back to Robin. "I'll deal with her later," Zoro firmly decided, wanting to keep an eye on Luffy in his unusual mood. Robin, seeing the captain of the ship unusually quiet, made arms sprout Luffy's shoulders, lifting his hat to reveal his distracted expression, and then poked his cheeks. "Wah?" Luffy's startled yelp broke the silence as he leaned back instinctively, only to lose his balance. With a loud splash, Luffy tumbled straight into the waiting arms of the sea. "Damn it, Luffy!" Zoro roared, leaping over the railing without hesitation after tossing his swords aside. Even though he knew that Luffy is the son of the sea, he couldn't help but dive straight after Luffy as if it was planted in his instincts. "Can't I stay here a bit longer?" Luffy murmured, his voice echoing underwater, and clearly heard by Zoro, who froze mid-stroke to retrieve his captain as he further drifted to the bottom, cradled by the ocean. Moreover, the words weren't garbled or distorted by the sea, they were clear, heavy and laced with a sadness which stabbed Zoro's heart, desperately showing how much something was weighing on Luffy's heart and mind. Before Zoro could even say something, a faint, wistful smile touched Luffy's lips, lacking his usual charm and joy. "Can't do that, huh? Maybe later." Luffy mumbled, stretching his arms languidly, as if signaling to Zoro to pick him up. Zoro was quick to snap out of his stupor, anger and concern, which were swirling inside him violently at Luffy's listless and unusual self. Without another word or thought, he paddled towards Luffy, grabbing him firmly and hauling him to the surface. As they broke through the water's surface, Zoro's grip tightened protectively around Luffy, who had his head hidden in his chest. "You can tell me whatever's troubling you. You know that, right?" Zoro said, his voice low and steady despite the concern willing to leak and loom all over the place. Luffy blinked, his usually cheerful eyes flickering to blue and red as they met Zoro's. There was a flicker of something raw in them, grief, worry and perhaps loneliness that words couldn't fully convey, if Zoro looked past at the strange color of his eyes. Then, the faintest of smiles appeared on Luffy's face. "Yeah, I know," he said softly. When they reached the deck back, Nami was already bought by Robin after she provided the orange-headed girl a pouch full of precious gems. Usopp and Chopper were laughing as Robin with the help of her fruit powers and extra limbs kept them entertained, and Sanji lovingly provided Robin with a plate full of delicious desserts. "They all are morons," Zoro grumbled under his breath. She, Zoro thinks too much." Luffy's mood was back to the jovial one as he hoped out of Zoro's hold and ran to join Usopp and Chopper. "Don't worry, Robin is good." He turned to Zoro once and spoke. Zoro could only shake his head a little and watch as Sanji was quick to hand Luffy a drink and make sure that the team drank it completely before handing out snacks to everyone. Even Usopp and Chopper were cautious around Luffy and kept an eye out for him. It almost felt that the worry about an enemy overboard was kept to the side to make sure Luffy felt okay. Well, Zoro couldn't say that he would be doing the same, but also keep a watch over Robin too, at least for a bit. It was night when Luffy sneaked out of his hammock and stepped onto the deck. The moon, hidden moments ago behind a veil of clouds, peeked out, casting a silvery glow over the deck and the sea. It grinned and waved happily to its creator, as if to comfort him, but Nika barely noticed, his red eyes staring at the endless ocean, in his mind a turbulent storm of emotions: grief, anger, confusion, disbelief, concern. They swirled and tangled, refusing to settle, leaving him paralyzed with the weight of it all. Nika didn't even know where to begin. His thoughts were scattered like fragments of broken glass as his gaze shifted to the ethereal figure before him. His mother. The sea goddess stood with a gentle smile over her watery face, with her arms open, warm and inviting, beckoning him into a place which promised solace, love and peace from the world. It wasn't that Luffy didn't want to. He wanted to crash into her arms, hug her and cry until the pain of Halad's loss dulled, to cry until the image of Ace's broken state which he saw through the images the winds created for him earlier didn't feel so unbearable. But he knew that no amount of tears could change the truth. Halid was gone, his beloved brother, the kindest soul he had ever known was dead and can't ever be brought back. Not when eons have passed and his essence had shattered and power passed. Nika hated that he carried Halad's power, the winds, storms, rain and sky which Halid had once commanded with laughter and joy. A selfish part of him was relieved that this part of his brother remained with him, yet the guilt gnawed at his soul, knowing that his brother passed on his power to someone who was the cause of his death. It was his fault. His actions that had led to Halad's death, and the thought of it haunted him. It was the same thing once again. His mother had hidden the truth from him, not telling him the whereabouts of Halid, not even when Halid was caught up in a mess and everyone except he knew. And right now even, she hadn't told him anything, deliberately changing the topics whenever he had asked about Ace. She hadn't told him about him, not about Ace being hurt physically and mentally, not about Ace willingly throwing himself in harm's way without fighting back. He hated to know that Ace's eyes had the same doubt about his existence as back when he met. He hated to know that a simple misunderstanding made Ace revert to his earlier form. He wasn't angry at the world this time. No, he was angry at himself. Luffy had seen it in his eyes the moment he had seen him in that small tavern with Sabo, Bonnie and Kuma. "Why?" Nika choked out, his voice raspy and throat-clogged. He wasn't even sure what he was asking. Was it about Halid or about Ace? Both of them are precious to him, equally irreplaceable. So why did no one tell him when the people he loved were in danger? Nika clenched his fists as his voice cracked. "Why doesn't anyone trust me? Why didn't you tell me, mother? Am I too weak? Too fragile to handle it?" "Nika, you're not weak." Nika's mother's cool hands gently cupped his face, wiping away the tears that streaked down his cheeks. Nika stood rigid, his eyes clenched shut and his fists shaking as he tried to rein in his sobs. He didn't want anyone to see him breaking down, him questioning everything. No, he didn't want to. "Then, why?" Nika wailed. The words ripped from his throat as he finally collapsed into his mother's embrace. One of her stroked his hair and the other traced soothing circles on his back. The sea goddess held him close, her expression serene but distant, her silence stretched, and when she finally spoke, her words sent a chill through Nika. It was necessary. Destiny needed Halid to die. The cruel words slipped off the goddess's mouth as if it was nothing, making Nika flinch and his eyes snap wide open. The cruel words slipped out of the goddess's mouth as if it was nothing, striking Nika like a blow, making him flinch and pull back to stare at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. How could she say those words so easily? How could she not see the gaping hole in his heart? How could she accept it so easily? Destiny? Nika croaked, the word barely leaving his lips. What kind of destiny would need him to die? Halid was the kindest, the gentlest, the best brother I could have asked for. What destiny could be worth losing him? Nika's voice raised with each of his words, pushing away from his mother's grip, only to be pulled in her waters. He was like an unwilling child. See everything his mother was saying to reason Halad's death. Destiny is not kind, Nika. It weaves a tapestry that none of us can fully see. Halad's sacrifice was a thread that held the world together when it threatened to collapse. Without his loss, the chaos that followed would have devoured everything. Her voice hardened slightly. Destiny always takes what it needs, no matter how much it hurts. The sea goddess's blue eyes stared at those red and blue eyes of her son, remembering the time when eons ago she had to coax her son back from the haunted and hollow space which he had trapped himself in. Refusing to get out. Not wanting to believe that Halid was truly gone. Nika's breath hitched as his mother's words echoed repeatedly in his mind. His heart ached, but he forced himself to ask the question that burned in his chest. "And Ace? Why didn't you tell me about Ace? About his trust being shattered to pieces by the Whitebeards? About him throwing himself to dangers without fighting back? Why didn't you?" The sea goddess's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, she remained silent and Nika felt as if he saw a flicker of sorrow in her usually calm eyes. "Because it is necessary." When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with mystery. "Destiny needs Ace and Teach to meet. Their collision will spark the fire that ignites a new era. And for that era to begin," she trailed off. "No," Nika shouted, his heart pounding in his chest as realization made itself known. "I'm not letting anyone else I love die. Not for Destiny, not for some new era. If Destiny wants to take them, it'll have to go through me first." His voice was barely a whisper at first, but then it grew louder and firmer with each word. He refused to lose anyone, not anymore. Destiny is a force that even I and the Almighty cannot fully deny. We are binded to it, unable to defy it, Nika. Even you are. The sea goddess spoke, her eyes staring at the determined blaze which lit in her son's eyes. For destiny was not a god or personified entity but a natural law that shapes the flow of time and events. It is impartial, ruthless and unyielding. The gods, even the Almighty, despite their power are bound by destiny. They may influence the mortal world, but they cannot escape its demands. I refuse to be bound by anything I choose not to, Nika stated determinedly as he stepped back from his mother and raised above the waters. He wanted to leave. He needed to. He just couldn't believe that his mother could ever say that. Nika, if I have to fight destiny itself, I will. Nika spoke, without turning back as he headed to his ship, to the top of the crow nest. I won't lose anyone else. I will be stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, to protect everyone. As Luffy headed inside his cabin, he didn't notice the gentle yet proud smile which was carved on the sea goddess's face. If anyone could challenge it, it would be you, my unruly son. The first rays of dawn painted the horizon in mesmerizing hues as Robin stepped onto the deck after a night of strange, deep dreams. She hadn't even expected to get any shut-eye, especially while staying with a crew that was surely wary of her, except for the captain. But surprisingly, for the first time, Robin had truly slept without a care in the world, which was immensely relaxing for her. Robin let a small smile slip as she rejoiced at the soft swaying of the waves and the serene rhythm that matched the tranquil air, while running her gaze over the ship, which eventually landed on the figurehead of the ship. There, curled like a child, was Luffy, with his straw hat tipped over his face. Robin titled her head in slight confusion while a soft smile spread on her lips. It was really strange for her to see the captain sleeping on the figurehead, especially considering that he is a devil fruit user and a child, who can topple over to the sea without proper supervision. Noticing the chill of the early morning breeze, Robin was quick to summon a blanket with her powers as arms sprouted to fold it neatly into her hands as she approached the teen. But as she drew closer, her sharp observing eyes caught sight of something strange. There's a faint glow emanating from Luffy's back, illuminating through the fabric of his shirt in a peculiar, almost rhythmic pattern. Almost like a circle, or was it the sun encompassed with some other figure? Curiosity got the best of Robin, unable to keep itself locked even though she heard the faint footsteps on the deck. Her hands reached forward to lift the fabric, with her mind already piecing together theories when... "Oi, Robin. What do you think you're doing?" Robin was quick to straighten up and turned to see Sanji approaching, his expression a careful mix of charm and suspicion. "Just curious about Captain San. That's all," Robin replied evenly, as she slipped the blanket gently over Luffy but not without first showing the faint glow emanating from his back to the cook. Sanji's eyes widened for a moment before he was quick to school his expressions. Our captain's full of surprises and mysteries, but it's his story to tell, not ours to dig into. A fair point. Robin smiled, noticing how Sanji observed her every move until she was far away from Luffy. When Robin finally left Luffy alone, Sanji took a glance of Luffy. He had seen and known enough to know that Luffy wasn't normal. He has a plethora of secrets which he wasn't going to pry into, not until Luffy was ready to say. After all, it was only fair to return the favor since even he has not said anything about his past. Though, that didn't stop him from pondering over the little hints Luffy drops like a bombshell. Luffy muttering to Chopper about not being human. The time where he commanded the Sea Kings like they were under him. The unnatural body temperature. The quiet moments where he seemed lost in thought and many more. Still Sanji couldn't help but doubt whenever he sees Zoro's eyes flick with understanding at something Luffy does, making him question whether Luffy told Zoro about something. He truly didn't like the idea that Zoro knew something Luffy which he didn't, but as long as someone knew what to do if things spiraled out of control regarding Luffy, Sanji could live with it. At least for now. Until his blonde hair doesn't turn gray with all the trouble and mishaps Luffy finds himself in. "Care for tea?" Sanji offered Robin, letting his usual flirtatious grin slip into place, wanting to keep the woman somewhere within his reach. And if it was for distracting himself from Luffy's secrets, then no one needs to know. That would suffice. "Thank you," Robin chuckled, reading his intent easily. "Right this way, my lady." Sanji gestured towards the galley with a sweeping bow, leading the woman in. Time was soon to pass and the rest of the crew to stir awake. Zoro was the next to emerge from the men's cabin, stretching with a groan before glancing at the figurehead instinctively and groaning when he found Luffy sleeping there, bundled under a blanket, without a care in the world. "Why am I not surprised?" Zoro muttered, trudging over to his sleeping captain. "Oi, Zoro. Wake Luffy up, breakfast's ready," Usopp shouted, waking groggily inside the galley once again after completing his assigned job by Sanji. At the sound and smell of meat and other delicacies wafting through the air, Luffy was quickled to stir awake, rubbing his eyes and yawning wide. "Zoro," he mumbled groggily, reaching up like a child wanting to be picked up. Zoro blinked, his brow twitching at Luffy's actions and his unsaid wants. "Oi, what's with you?" "Ari me." Luffy whined, still half asleep, with his voice muffled against the blanket, which he half seemed like going back to cuddle and sleep to. "Are you kidding me? You've got legs, you moron?" Don't act like a spoiled brat. Zoro grumbled, though he bent down to scoop Luffy up with practiced ease, knowing well enough that this wouldn't be the last time he would have to pick up the godchild and go along with his whims. But did he even want to? You're lucky I don't toss you overboard. Aro wouldn't, Luffy mumbled confidently, snuggling against Zoro's chest as if wanting to make up for the loss of warmth from the blanket. Zoro could give Luffy that. He wouldn't ever drop him into the ocean, and if he did, Zoro knew he would dive straight after him, no matter the circumstances. Oi. You're warmer than usual, Zoro commented, his brow furrowing when Luffy's body temperature felt much higher than normal. Got new powers. Luffy mumbled through a yawn, barely audible to anyone but Zoro as his eyes blinked sluggishly and he struggled to keep his eyes open. Even if the sight of Luffy's sleepy cuteness was too adorable, Zoro's feet froze for an entirely different reason. It was the weight of those words, new powers. It was that phrase which pierced his heart with a blade. New powers, Zoro's voice came out low, his usual steadiness replaced by something softer, almost fearful. His mind raced with implications he didn't want to face, scenarios he didn't want to imagine, which came with Luffy getting one more step closer to his godly powers. Luffy. Are you gonna leave us? Zoro's heart almost stopped beating as he stared at Luffy with those wide fearful eyes. The uncharacteristic vulnerability in Zoro's voice startled Nami, who had just turned to see him carrying Luffy inside. She stiffened, her brows drawing together. Zoro, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Her tone wavered, and her gaze flicked nervously to their captain, dreading that whatever had shaken Zoro had something to do with the boy who held all their hearts together. Yeah, Mosshead, Sanji chimed in, his voice lined with forced nonchalance as he approached with a tray of tea. Saw a nightmare or something. Unknown to Sanji, he hit right on mark. But Sanji wasn't able to realize that as his smirk faltered when he noticed how Zoro's gaze was fixed solely on Luffy, who was absent-mindedly rubbing his eyes. Zoro's expression wasn't just fear, it was raw, unguarded panic. And that was extremely rare. Oi. What's going on? Usopp asked hesitantly, clutching his cup of coffee as if it might shield him from whatever was unraveling in front of him. Robin's gaze lingered on Zoro, her sharp eyes catching every unspoken detail. She didn't press, but her raised brow betrayed her curiosity. Zoro, however, didn't hear any of them. He couldn't hear them. His world had narrowed to the boy in his arms, the weight of his thoughts spiraling into a single, terrifying possibility. That Luffy was being pulled further into the godly realm and away from them. That would absolutely leave his heart bleeding. And Zoro was sure that if Luffy was to ever leave, then it would rattle everyone, except Robin, but Zoro doubted she was here without any deal from Luffy, to their very cores, or even leave their hearts hollow. They were already not over with Luffy's kidnapping by the Three Seas. That had let them absolutely scar. None of them said it aloud. Luffy blinked, fully awake, and smiled softly as though the weight of Zoro's unspoken fears was nothing more than air now. Nah, I've decided, he said simply, his grin widening and rivaling like the sun. I'll fight to stay with you guys. Zoro exhaled sharply, the tension he hadn't realized he'd been holding draining from him in a rush. His shoulders sagged, and for the second time that day, he let his emotions show openly. A rare, genuine smile curved his lips, unguarded and full of relief. Idiot, he muttered, his voice tinged with fondness. You should have told me earlier, made me worry for nothing. She. Luffy's laughter bubbled out, and he nuzzled closer, clearly enjoying Zoro's relief. For once, it seemed, his captain's impulsiveness had brought peace instead of chaos. Sorry, Zoro, Luffy chirped gleefully. I'll stay, no matter what destiny says. What do you mean by staying? Nami asked with her eyes slightly wide, unable to forego the implications that statement carried. Were you planning to leave us? What? Chopper's eyes went wide as tears glistened in them and he nearly toppled his drink. Luffy, you weren't, were you? Chopper spluttered. Usopp's jaw dropped, his cup of coffee trembling in his hands. Don't tell me, how could you? He cut himself off, unwilling to finish the thought. Even Sanji's usual composure cracked, his gaze narrowing on Luffy and his heart sinking at the very thought. Oi, idiot. You got some nerve scaring us like that. Where would you even have went without needing us? Robin didn't say anything, but her sharp gaze lingered on Luffy, curiosity dancing in her eyes as she wondered if Luffy was going to ditch her after giving her hope. Luffy blinked at the sudden barrage of questions, his grin faltering just slightly as he took in the worried, almost hurt expressions of his crew. For a moment, the room fell into a tense silence, and then Luffy shook his head vigorously. Never, Luffy said with conviction, his voice cutting through the tension. I didn't want to leave you guys, not even when I was confused with. Luffy stopped for a while, remembering the fear and the dreaded feeling of time zoning on him, which left him scared and panicked. I just didn't know what I was supposed to do back, but now I do. Luffy lifted his head from Zoro's crook and looked at each of his friends with his grin returning as warm as ever. I'll stay no matter what. Even if destiny says otherwise, you guys are stuck with me. The crew exchanged glances, everyone wondering if they should press further on, but decided against it when Luffy's stomach growled. They could always ask about it later and hope to get slightly less insane answers, which they could digest. Luffy wriggled slightly in Zoro's arms, clearly intending to hop down. "Let's get to breakfast, I'm starving." Zoro gave a small huff but smirked, loosening his grip to let Luffy slide down. But just as Luffy took a step towards the galley, he froze mid-step. His body stiffened, and his eyes widened as he turned his gaze skyward. "Luffy?" Zoro called, concern flashing across his face as he reached for his shoulder. "Is something wrong?" Sanji questioned, with worry clear in his voice. Before anyone else could press further, there was a soft clink on the deck, followed by another and another. "Eh, is it raining now?" Usopp asked, squinting upwards as he picked the noises. "Nami," Luffy's voice was firm, absent of all of his usual playfulness as he further commanded, "We need to move, now." The urgency in Luffy's tone sent a jolt through Nami. "What?" "No time to explain. Just do it," Luffy shouted as he himself rushed down to the deck, followed closely by the others. Nami's breath hitched, but she trusted her captain's instincts. She dashed to the helm, quickly turning the Mary's rudder and directing the ship under Luffy's command. The rest of the crew also scrambled to action, their confusion quickly turning to alarm as the sky above them began to darken. "Oi, what the hell is this?" Sanji muttered, shielding his eyes with a hand as he peered upward. Debris of all things began raining down, splintered planks, broken barrels, tattered sails, and the unmistakable smell of old, rotting wood filled the air. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, and a massive fragment of what could only be a ship came plummeting toward the sea. The crew's jaws collectively dropped as it narrowly missed the Mary, crashing into the water with a thunderous splash. Luffy darted to the railing, gripping it so tightly that his knuckles turned white and eerily pale, almost as if they were drained of blood. His wide eyes sparkled with unrestrained awe and curiosity as he stared upward at the chaos unfolding. "Ships," he murmured, his voice full of childish wonder. "They're falling from the sky." His voice brimmed with unleashed excitement and curiosity as his body trembled with joy. The crew, however, was less enchanted and more spooked and panicked. "A galleon?" Nami gasped, her eyes wide and sweat trickling down from her temples. "What the?" Sanji's cigarette dropped from his mouth, rolling on the deck as the Mary swayed along the waves, but none of them felt like toppling and getting crushed by the enormous waves. What the hell is going on?" Usopp shrieked, ducking behind the mast. "This has to be a nightmare, right? Right? I'll open my eyes, and everything will be fine." He squeezed his eyes shut, muttering fervent prayers to himself, but when he opened them, his worst fear greeted him. A skeleton, still clutching the remains of a shattered coffin, landed squarely on the deck in front of him. "Ah!" Usopp's scream could have woken the dead as he stumbled backward, his arms flailing wildly. Robin, even though shocked at the absurdity of the situation, managed to stay calm and was arriving at a possible conclusion. "Navigator-san, what does the log post say?" she asked, her eyes not straying from the coffin which Usopp threw aside to hold the mast for his dear life like Chopper. Pulled from her shock, Nami quickly glanced at the log pose on her wrist, only to freeze. Her face turned pale as she let out a horrified shriek. "It's broken. The log pose is stuck pointing straight up." "No matter how bizarre it seems, Nami-san, one must never doubt the log pose. That's an ironclad rule when sailing these seas. Doubt the common sense in your mind if you must, but never the log pose," Robin calmly answered, her calm voice cutting through Nami's panic. Luffy's eyes lit up with sparkles and stars as he pointed skyward. "There's gotta be an island up there, a sky island." "A what?" Zoro questioned with wide eyes like everyone who had never even heard the concept of a sky island. Without answering, Luffy turned and did the unthinkable. He leapt over the railing, eliciting simultaneous shouts of alarm from the crew. "Luffy!" Zoro and Sanji shouted in unison as they scrambled to the railing and were about to dive in after their idiot. Instead of splashing into the sea, Luffy landed deftly on a large piece of debris, laughing gleefully as he hopped from one fragment to another. "Shi. It's so fun," he exclaimed, his joy infectious even amidst the chaos. "What's with him?" Sanji growled, gripping the railing tight. "I swear, he's gonna be the death of us all," Zoro muttered, though his relief was clear. His sharp eyes stayed locked on Luffy, watching the captain hop from plank to plank with a carefree laugh. "Usopp, Chopper, come on, it's fun," Luffy called, waving to them with an enormous grin. Usopp hesitated, glancing nervously at the wreckage below. "If he can do it, I can do it," he muttered, psyching himself up. "I mean, what's the worst that could?" Ack! A sudden gust of wind sent him tumbling over the railing, his shriek of terror echoing as he landed awkwardly on a floating plank. He sat up, laughing nervously. "See? No problem." Chopper shook his head furiously, gripping the mast. "I'll pass," he squeaked, his hooves clutching the wood aline. Zoro sighed. "Idiot," he muttered, leaping down with practiced ease to join Luffy and Usopp on the debris. He landed firmly beside them, arms crossed, and shot Luffy a warning glance. "You better not fall in, Captain. I'm not diving in after you again." She, don't worry, Zoro," Luffy chirped, bounding over to a broken crate and rooting through it. "Oi, what's this?" Usopp muttered, picking up a water-damaged scroll from the wreckage. He unrolled it cautiously, his eyes widening as he saw a crude but detailed map of an island floating among clouds. "Guys, look at this." Luffy bounded over, his face lighting up as he snatched the map from Usopp's hands. "Sky Island," he exclaimed, practically vibrating with excitement. "We need to show it to Nami and the others," Luffy chirped, happily darting towards the Mary to show their findings and the proof of the Sky Island to others, who were reasonably endowed. Robin, who had been inspecting the skeleton that had fallen earlier, nodded at her findings with the inputs from the doctor of the crew. "The skeleton is about 200 years old. Perhaps, a Sky Island truly exists even though I haven't ever read about it. That type of surgery only happened in the past." Chopper nodded, pointing towards the 2 holes in the skeleton's skull while still hiding behind the mast with Nami. "Then there has to be an island up in the sky." Luffy grinned wide, jumping up and down on the deck, holding up the map like a treasure. He had never doubted about the existence of the Sky Island, having been told stories from his dad and mother. But he was not going to take help from any of them. This Sky Island Skypia was theirs to find without the help of the others. Robin gave a small, mysterious smile as she watched the endless energy in Luffy. "It's possible," she spoke, her eyes glinting with curiosity about the Sky Island. "Woohoo!" Usopp and Luffy cheered, spinning in circles with Chopper in excitement and glee. "We can go to the Island of Dreams." "Sky Island," Nami muttered from the deck, staring at the log pose on her wrist, which still pointed straight up. "Sky Islands are just a myth, right? There's no way this is real." "Don't ruin it," Usopp wailed, looking utterly dejected, along with Chopper. "I'm not saying that it might not exist," Nami said hurriedly, waving her hands when she saw Luffy's pout and the hollow faces of Usopp and Chopper. "But, the thing is, I have no freaking clue how to get there." Luffy puffed up his cheeks in frustration, but he soon lit up. "Then we'll have to find more clues," he uttered, looking at the sea where the ruins of the ship had already sunk. Zoro, leaning against the railing, considered her words. If the ship fell from a sky island, then whatever's left might give us some answers. Could be worth diving for it. "Yeah, plus it wouldn't hurt to check for valuables," Sanji added, lighting a cigarette as his gaze flicked to Luffy. "You never know, a wreck like that could hold something interesting." "Hell, yeah," Luffy chirped, even though he could feel they won't be finding anything much from the ship, but maybe he can get some armor or something? "Let me bring my latest diving suits, Luffy." Usopp was cut off with shrieks erupting from everyone's throats as Luffy dived headfirst into the water, without any warning. "What the hell, idiot?" Sanji shouted, tossing off his jacket as he dove in right after his moron captain. Zoro threw his katana aside, while his mind replayed the memory of the last afternoon. Would Luffy even need their help? Or was he completely okay in the waters all by himself? A splash sound of Sanji tearing through the water resounded, snapping Zoro out of his thoughts and to follow them into the water. But the moment Zoro entered the water, he could see Sanji's wide eyes, and the source of it? Luffy. Luffy, who was getting nudged by a big-ass sea turtle who was wiggling like a noodle. Almost like Sanji when he would swoon after girls. The sight would have made Zoro laugh, if it didn't feel so unnerving. "Zoro, Sanji, over here," Luffy called cheerfully, gesturing them toward the wreckage of the ship, not even affected by the strange behavior of the sea turtle and the other small sea creatures who were soon approaching Luffy. Zoro glanced at Sanji, who utterly wanted to question everything, especially Luffy able to talk in the water. Hell, who was he kidding? Even he wants to know, after yesterday's incident. He hadn't been able to get to ask Luffy, and had later chalked it off to Luffy's godly powers, but was that because of it? It was a high possibility though. "Come on guys." Luffy's call finally had Zoro swimming towards the wreckage, followed by Sanji. They would need to resurface to take a breather soon though. The air around them shifted strangely, and the water shimmered and parted, revealing an open space inside the hull filled with breathable air. "What the?" Sanji spluttered the moment he landed on the wreckage and felt his lungs greedily gulping for the air which was somehow mysteriously present around them, despite them being in the middle of the ocean. This doesn't make any damn sense. Even Zoro was utterly surprised, but he knew that it had to be the doing of Luffy. "Oi, Luffy!" Sanji lost it, especially after seeing Luffy still surrounded by water and talking excitedly to the sea turtle and the other aquatic creatures, which were gathering around him. "What's going on? How can you talk in the waters? Heck, how are we even breathing down here?" Sanji let out a barrage of questions, from his eyes glancing at the gigantic sea turtle, who could easily make a meal out of them, out of Luffy. But everything the sea turtle displayed was utter loyalty and affection. And what's with that thing? "Huh? Why can't I?" Luffy blinked, tilting his head curiously, clearly puzzled by Sanji's reaction while the giant turtle nudged him gently again, eliciting a giggle out of Luffy. "And, this guy? He's Mr. Turtle," Luffy giggled gleefully as he patted the massive turtle's head again. "Oh, this guy? He's Mr. Turtle." The turtle nudged him gently, low, rumbling purr escaping from its throat, causing small ripples to vibrate through the watery space. Sanji gawked at the interaction, still trying to process the absurdity of everything he was seeing. It was a lot to take in, even when he was considering it from Luffy's standard. Anyways, Luffy hopped away from the turtle with an excited laugh, landing with a splash near the wreckage. "Let's go, guys. Maybe we'll find some awesome treasure here." Luffy grinned wide, about to run away in some hidden parts of the ship, when the turtle let out a series of deep, rumbling sounds catching Luffy midway. "What is it, Mr. Turtle?" Luffy questioned, paying attention to the words the ancient turtle was uttering, which was quick to make Luffy grin wide like a sun in the ocean. "What is it now?" Sanji grumbled, rummaging through pieces of junk. At least they were successfully occupying his mind and not making him feel crazy. She. Mr. Turtle says that we can learn more about the Sky Island in Jaya," Luffy declared, floating back to the sea turtle effortlessly to take a seat on the crown of its head. "Let's go there." "Jaya?" Zoro frowned, having heard of the name somewhere. "Why does it sound familiar?" "It's one of the pirate islands in the Grand Line. Lots of pirates hang out there, and Dad and Ace told me it's full of treasure maps, stories and crazy stuff," Luffy explained excitedly, while in the water, which was truly making Sanji want to shoot an array of questions to Luffy right there and now, especially seeing how the Mosshead was taking this well than him. "Let's go to Jaya then, Captain," Zoro spoke. Sanji sighed, choosing to resurface now that the next destination was fixed. There was no use of asking Luffy questions, who takes everything abnormal as normal. But as much as he hates to think about it, he would need to ask the Mosshead about it, considering how he wasn't even batting an eye to Luffy's absurdity. "Okay," led, his laughter echoing through the water as he happily kicking his legs as Zoro and Sanji swam to the surface alongside the giant turtle. But as soon as Sanji, Zoro, Luffy and the turtle broke the surface of the water, the rest of the Straw Hats were already gathered at the railing, their voices blending into a cacophony of shrieks and gasps. What am I even looking at, a continent?" Nami shrieked, as she scurried away from the railing. I dunno, I'm not looking," Usopp wailed, as his hands stayed glued to his eyes the moment the gigantic monster appeared. "This is a dream. This is a dream. A dream? Really, Chopper, the ever-naive one?" questioned from behind the mast. "Everyone relax. Mr. Turtle's a friend," Luffy called out, waving enthusiastically at the others from the giant sea turtle as it surfaced alongside the Mary while Zoro and Sanji, both soaked and visibly annoyed, climbed onto the deck. "Relax, he says," Sanji muttered, wringing water from his soaked shirt. "Like it's normal to have a sea monster trailing us. Not to mention, him talking in the water." He grumbled the last part only to himself and Zoro. "Luffy's idea of normal is completely broken," Zoro grumbled, but his eyes flicked warily to the massive creature now swimming placidly beside their ship. Before the others could also begin to process the insanity of the situation, Luffy clapped his hands together, drawing everyone's attention. "Mr. Turtle says that in Jaya we can find clues about the Sky Island. Skypia," he declared, beaming as if he's the sun himself. "Jaya?" Nami repeated, crossing her arms, and squinting her eyes at Luffy's beaming figure. She. "Yeah. We are setting sail for Jaya," Luffy cheered, his enthusiasm practically contagious, though it earned a few skeptical stares. "What about the way, Captain San?" Robin questioned with a faint smile, watching Luffy's every move carefully. She wouldn't be surprised, though, if somehow the captain possessed an eternal pose of the pirate island. "Mr. Turtle would show us the way," Luffy declared proudly, patting the creature's head as though it were a loyal steed. "Can we trust that thing?" Usopp asked nervously, as a bead of sweat rolled down his temple as he glanced uneasily at the towering turtle. One might think that the crew were accustomed to Luffy's oddities, especially after having seen Luffy sitting on the crown of so many sea monsters by this time. "Like we have a choice," Zoro muttered, leaning against the railing with his arms crossed as Robin's fruit powers helped to secure a rope between the Mary and the turtle. Just as the crew began to settle, a sudden shift in the atmosphere made the air grow heavy and cold. A strange chill ran down their spines, and an unnatural darkness descended over the sea, extinguishing the light. "What's going on now?" Nami exclaimed, gripping the railing as an oppressive tension settled over them. The sea turtle let out a deep, mournful groan, its massive body trembling as it began to retreat slightly. Luffy's eyes widened in confusion as he looked upward at the untimely darkening sky. Was the sun going astray without him, its guardian? Luffy thought, but that didn't make sense since his powers still are sealed and the sun has been without him for almost 800 years. The day turned to night, Chopper cried, his voice rising with panic as he clung to Usopp's leg. "Just what the hell is going on, Luffy?" Usopp hollered, his voice cracking as he cupped his hands around his mouth. The crew froze, their collective gazes snapping upward as the swirling sky above them revealed three colossal silhouettes that materialized out of thin air. The figures were humanoid but impossibly large, with wing-like structures extending from their backs and long spears in their hands. They loomed in the heavens like ancient guardians, their features indistinct but their presence oppressive. The figures were impossibly large, their features shadowed and indistinct, with wing-like structures extending from their backs. Long, spear-like weapons gleamed faintly in their hands, their presence suffocating as though they were divine guardians, or harbingers of doom. "What the hell are those?" Zoro demanded, his hand instinctively moving towards his swords. "Monsters," Usopp screamed, his legs trembling as he darted toward the nearest cover. "We're doomed," Chopper wailed, his fur bristling as the figures loomed closer. The tension shattered when one of the figures raised its enormous spear, the movement slow but deliberate. Its weapon caught the faint light of the moon, casting an ominous glow that made it clear it wasn't hesitating to strike. "Move it! Get us out of here!" Zoro bellowed, rushing toward the helm. Nami's hands trembled as she scrambled to steer. "We can't outrun those things." "Everyone, row or paddle. Do something," Usopp screeched, already fumbling for a cannon he wasn't even sure would work. But amidst the chaos, one voice cut through with eerie calm. "Whoa," Luffy murmured, his tone low and almost reverent as he stared at the figures. His eyes shimmered with fascination, a wide grin splitting his face. "Cool. Cool," Zoro and Sanji roared in unison, their frustration boiling over as they snapped their heads toward their captain. Before they could yell at him further, the sea turtle suddenly let out a terrified wail. The massive creature thrashed in the water, its fear palpable, and began to flee, its frantic movements rocking the Mary violently. "Wait, Mr. Turtle. Slow down," Luffy cried, clinging to the turtle's head as it barreled away from the towering figures. "It's taking the ship," Usopp screamed, his grip on the mast turning his knuckles white. "Luffy, get back here," Zoro roared, barely managing to steady himself as the ship was dragged along. "This isn't awesome, you idiot," Sanji shouted furiously, holding onto the rigging as the waves crashed against the Mary. But Luffy didn't seem to hear them, his gaze fixed upward as the figures grew smaller and smaller in the distance, a glimmer of curiosity and faint recognition still sparking in his eyes. The rest of the crew, meanwhile, could only focus on survival as the turtle dragged them further and further from the danger above. The perplexed crew stood on the deck of the Going Mary, watching as the massive sea turtle disappeared into the depths of the ocean. Bye, Mr. Turtle. Thanks for showing us the way," Luffy hollered, leaning the ship's railing as his hands waved enthusiastically as if he could see the retreating back of the monstrous turtle. Behind him, the rest of the Straw Hat Pirates were silent, their faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief after the whirlwind of events that had unfolded over the day. A day that, remarkably, was far from over. "I can't believe it," Sanji muttered, lighting what had to be his 20th cigarette. He inhaled deeply, his hands trembling slightly. He couldn't tell whether it was from the absurdity of the situation or the sheer amount of nicotine coursing through his system. Today's been one hell of a strange day. Not even the absurdity and the fairy tales could compare to what had occurred in just a mere few hours. Usopp, leaning heavily against the railing, nodded weakly. His wide eyes darted across the ocean's surface, as if half expecting another colossal creature to emerge. A huge galleon falls out of the sky. His voice wavered, and he wiped the sweat trickling down his temple. He shook his head vigorously, trying to forget the terrifying images of those colossal creatures, but it didn't help. Not when his scared mind was supplying the possibility of the same creatures belonging to the Sky Island, where Luffy was hell-bent on going. Nami, standing nearby with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, shot Usopp a look that was equal parts exasperation and unease. "The log pose is still pointing up," she said, her voice tense and eyes locked on the needle of the log pose, which stubbornly aimed skyward, defying all logic. The navigator hugged herself as though trying to fend off a creeping chill. This shouldn't even be possible. Chopper glanced at Luffy, his wide eyes filled with admiration. "Luffy made friends with a giant sea turtle," he recounted, his voice tinged with awe. "It's like creatures can't help but flock to him." A small smile crept onto his face. He knew better than anyone how magnetic Luffy's presence was. His unnatural warmth was what had drawn him to Luffy, after all. Still, it's amazing every time. Robin stood apart from the others, her arms folded as her sharp eyes scanned the horizon. The day turned to night without warning, she noted, her voice calm and measured. But beneath her composed exterior was a hint of unease that only those paying close attention could detect. And then those huge figures appeared. Luffy chimed in, his grin spreading ear to ear. He turned to face the others, his excitement undimmed. But his expression shifted, his brow furrowing as if he was in a deep thought. They didn't feel alive. It was like they were too far away or something. Maybe they were from the Sky Island. He scratched his head thoughtfully, before a huge warm grin spread across his face. "If they're there, I want to meet him again, they were so cool. I suddenly have I can't go to the Sky Island-itis," Usopp uttered in fear, clutching his heart and pretending to faint on the deck. causing Chopper to scramble over to him in concern. Leave it to Luffy to always say and do the unpredictable. Sanji muttered, shooting a glance at Zoro whose eyes were looking far to the horizon, as if he was contemplating everything. But there was something there that told Sanji that Zoro knew far more about Luffy than any one of them. Sanji's jaw tightened at the thought. Was he jealous that Luffy had let Zoro in on his secrets and left him and the entire crew out of it? Sanji didn't know, but he sure damn well would love to not freak about Luffy's constantly paling skin and finding him sleeping with sand. Where the hell did that even come from in the middle of the ocean? An unnatural glow every fucking morning on the figurehead or the crow nest. He would really growl. Sanji. I'm hungry. All the brooding thoughts and the look of contemplation on the faces of the Straw Hat Pirates vanished as Luffy's giggles filled the atmosphere on the deck. I'll warm up your breakfast. Sanji spoke, his boots clattering on the deck as he walked towards the galley to warm up the breakfast which Zoro and Luffy had missed completely due to all the events. The rest of them had some, but he would make sure to give everyone some snacks and warm chocolate milk after all that had happened. Meanwhile on the deck, the others were finally coming out of their shocks and looking forward to the island, which was getting clearer and clearer with each passing moment. I wonder what Jaya would be like, Usopp muttered from the crow nest, feeling a little better right now and trying his best to think that the colossal figures won't be there out in the Sky Island, and if there were any, Usopp gulped, at least Luffy would be there with him and the crew, right? Awesome. It has to be awesome. Luffy grinned, rocking on his place on the figurehead, while stuffing his face with the takoyaki which Sanji passed on to everyone. It even looks like one fun town to me, Luffy grinned happily. Yeah, it looks like a mini resort. Usopp commented, agreeing with Luffy as a smile came over his face. But is it just me, or are the ships docked at the port all pirate ships? Usopp questioned with a sweat drop as he noticed the ships using his goggles. Don't be silly, Usopp. There's no way pirate ships would brazenly dock right in front of the town. Nami was quick to argue with Usopp. Jaya is a lawless island far removed from the reaches of any government, Luffy chimed in. Not even the world government or the PPP. It's free. And full of pirates and other criminals. Luffy grinned happily, sharing his knowledge with the others and not noticing the utterly devastated look on Nami, Usopp and Chopper's face. Sounds like fun. Zoro grinned. No way it's fun, Nami screeched, belatedly hearing the shouts and ruckus coming from the town. She could already see that Chopper and Usopp wouldn't be leaving the ship in fear, and Robin preparing to leave to gather information on the Sky Island, while Sanji. For the first time, Nami noticed the deep in thought face of Sanji, stealing glances between Luffy and Zoro. What was wrong with him? What's going on? We are almost there, Jaya, 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 Luffy was happily chanting, bouncing all over the place when all of a sudden the winds picked up, shielding him and batting away the bullet which came dangerously close to hitting him straight in his temple. Luffy's body tensed and jaw clenched, as an unforgettable hockey signature made itself registered with the attempted assassination. Albeit being faint and the person trying to conceal himself too, well, Luffy, for the sun's sake, couldn't ever forget the malicious, venomous presence. It was as if the very air around him thickened, weighed down by a dark, oppressive force. Teach. Luffy's breath hitched and his usual grin faltered. The winds around the Going Merry suddenly began to howl, a howling growl that carried the brunt of his anger. His straw hat shifted slightly as his face became obscured in shadow. The hockey itself was so suffocatingly dark that it seemed to distort everything it touched. It was more than what he had previously felt when he had met Teach for the first time. The yummy yummy no am I, the fucking devil fruit, was oozing and laughing at him, as if taunting him. Luffy growled under his breath, his fists tightening as the memory of that vile, toxic presence flooded his mind, the cruel laughter, the manipulative words, the coldness that seeped into his bones. He couldn't avoid it. Teach, the bastard was off calling himself Blackbeard, was here, and destiny wants him to go after Ace. Luffy would not let that happen. Not even in his dreams. He will tear Teach limb to limb, incinerate his body to ashes, crush that devil of Yami Yami no Mi with his own 2 hands, and make sure that destiny would fucking know what happens when it crosses him for the second time to claim their hands on his broth. Luffy briefly registered the concern and worry evident in Sanji's voice, despite him wanting to shoot questions at him. Luffy could even feel the worried gazes of the others on his person. His grip on the railing tightened and his knuckles widened. The air around him seemed to shift. Winds whipped past the deck, fierce and howling, as though reflecting all of the inner anger which Luffy felt towards just one thing.
What's wrong? Is something going to happen again? It was Usopp who stammered, his nervous eyes darting between Luffy and the horizon.
Luffy didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the distant shore, his eyes hidden from others but dark and unreadable. And then, low and guttural, a single word let out from Luffy's mouth. Teach. What? Nami questioned. Even though she was standing closer to Luffy than the others, she couldn't hear the word which Luffy uttered, but whatever it was, it had to be concerning to make their sunshine incarnate this angry. Nami hadn't seen Luffy this angry ever, not even when he was fighting Arlong, or when the sandstorm was engulfing Yuba. The winds were howling all around him, whipping through the sails of the ship while the sea churned violently beneath them, leading everyone to hold onto something to keep themselves from toppling over. "Oi, Luffy, what's going on?" Zoro questioned, his eyes narrowing at Luffy. He didn't know what was going on, but something in the island has gotten the golden hellish opportunity to incur the wrath of the Nika, that Zoro was sure about. "Luffy, the winds will tear apart the sails," Sanji shouted over the whooshing and angry sounds of the wind, knowing full well that it was Luffy who was losing control of his emotions, but wasn't the weather responding more strongly than before? "Nika." Luffy took a deep breath, his grip frighteningly tight on the railing, yet he commanded the winds to slow down, assuring them mentally that he was fine, even if he felt far from it, but right now, he didn't need them to bring forth the chaos which was sure to happen. Soon, he was not going to let teach. "Nika, don't fight against destiny. You can't stop what's already been set in motion." Luffy could hear the soft yet commanding voice, full of desperation and concern from his mother, which was cutting through his anger like a sharp blade, cooing at him to calm down and not go after that blasted man. The very blasted man, whose hockey's pitch black, suffocating and utterly vile. The same fucking man who will lead his brother to death. "Destiny cannot take what's mine," Luffy growled out mentally to his mother, forcing himself to calm down. Also, Blackbeard has already started it and he would regret it. "Luffy," Zoro called firmly, stepping closer. "What's going on? Why are you so on edge?" Zoro whispered the last part only for Luffy to hear as he belatedly noticed that the winds calmed down and they had finally reached the island. Luffy forced himself to relax, loosening his grip on the railing. His eyes remained hidden beneath his hat. "It's nothing," he said, his tone quieter but firm. "I'll handle it." Yeah, he will handle it on his own. There was no need to drag his crew in this mess. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Zoro's sharp gaze lingered on Luffy longer than anyone else's. "Nika, don't chase after that thing." Luffy ignored his mother for the first time, his eyes set on the approaching island. "We need to find information about the Skypia, if you still want to go there, that is." Nami spoke, trying to ignore whatever weird thing that happened with Luffy right now. Yeah, she was concerned for him, but in no way she was going to ask him about it. The past questions and answers had given them enough information to be hunted down by the world government if they ever got wind of it. So, who knows what would happen if she questioned Luffy right now? A war? "Yeah, we need information." Usopp was happy to distract himself from something, anything to not question Luffy about what was happening. He was sure that if there is something out there in the island which could be a threat, then he was sure that Luffy or Zoro or Sanji will handle it easily. He trusts them, but if they can't then Captain Usopp will take the sea charge and rescue his friends. Yeah, to the Sky Island. Luffy finally allowed a grin to spread across his face as he noticed that they were docked on the island and bounced over the railings of the ship to land on the solid ground. "I can't wait to get there," Luffy chirped happily, as he glanced at the lawless streets of Jaya. The town sprawled before them like a wild, untamed jungle of pirates and criminals, some fighting off with another, some gambling, some playing rough and many more. The air was also thick with the smell of sweat, rotting food and the stench of unwashed bodies, making the cleaner members of the crew scrunch their noses in disgust. The buildings were haphazardly thrown together, with windows boarded up and doors that creaked on their hinges. Pirates walked freely, their eyes scanning the streets with a predatory gleam, while others sat on crates or leaned against walls, exchanging deals and dirty secrets. Luffy's sudden bright, infectious energy seemed at odds with the dark atmosphere oozing out of the town, but it didn't faze him at all. He was far too excited about finding information from their next adventure to care about the surrounding chaos, especially after he had shoved the problem with Blackbeard for later and in the back of his mind. "Come on, let's go," Luffy cheered, bouncing on the balls of his feet, eager to explore the chaotic town. "I'll tag along," Zoro muttered, recovering from the shock of Luffy's emotions first and jumping off the ship after Luffy. He wanted to say that he was tagging along to keep Luffy in check and away from trouble, but in reality he wanted to make sure that Luffy was okay. The surge of unpredictable emotions and the unfamiliarity of them on Luffy's face was worrying enough. The grief, anger, and now something more darker, which Luffy was concealing very well with his joy and happiness. He wanted to make sure Luffy didn't get too deep into whatever had been bothering him. "It's impossible," Nami muttered, holding the railing and peeking out towards Zoro and Luffy. "There's just no way those two are not gonna cause trouble." She spoke as a matter of fact. "Yeah, that town already looks like trouble. There's no way. Not now. Not ever." Usopp agreed from beside her, as he and Chopper watched the backs of Luffy and Zoro, about to disappear with the bustling crowd. "I can't leave them be," Nami stated, climbing on top of the railing to hop down the ship. There's no way that she was going to let them get chased by pirates now in this town. "Wait, Zoro, Luffy. There she goes," Chopper murmured with a sweat drop, watching as Nami caught up to Zoro and Luffy. "Well, I'm sure she'll be safe with those two," Usopp commented with a sigh. "Nami's out with those two? And even Robin left to gather information on the Sky Island," Sanji spoke, lighting another cigarette, which might be his 40th since the morning. "I'm outta here too then." He really needed to have a stroll to clear his mind and digest the information. But before he could leave, Usopp and Chopper, both with snot and tears dripping from their noses and eyes, latched onto his leg, begging him to not leave them alone. Meanwhile, as Luffy, Zoro and Nami walked through the streets, they encountered a number of shady figures eyeing them. Pirates with greasy hair and bulging muscles, drunks slumped on corners, and even a few women wearing far too little clothing to be considered respectable. All of them watched them like vultures sizing up their next meal, but they weren't approaching them, even if some of their eyes felt practically glued to Luffy's bracelets or Nami's body. It was as if something was warning them to not take a single step, and indeed there was. Luffy, even though he was in a far better mood after his realization of Teach being in help but not want to bother with the weak pirates littering all over the town, sizing him and his friends. Hence, there was a little bit of his haki, a mere drop of it, leaking from him, giving the dumb pirates and criminals a warning to not approach or it would not end up well. But was he even in the mood to engage with some weak pirates? Nah, he has better plans than that. "Alright, Luffy, promise me something," Nami suddenly said, her voice firm as she grabbed Luffy by his wrist, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't cause a ruckus." She couldn't help but feel that Luffy was going to do it nonetheless, but they can't do it this time. "We're here to gather information, and if you or Zoro fight, then we can't get enough information to get to Sky Island. So, please promise me you both will not fight," Nami proclaimed, her eyes darting to Zoro as well, giving him a fair warning. For a split second, there was a frown on Luffy's lips before he grinned widely and gave a casual playful salute to Nami. "Of course, I won't fight until we find out how to get to Skypia. After that, no promises," he added, his voice full of mischief. Zoro's sharp eyes narrowed at Luffy's wordings. He caught onto the unspoken promise that Luffy wasn't fully intending to avoid trouble, and a frown tugged at the corners of his mouth at the meaning behind it. There was trouble, an enemy, on the island, which Luffy knew from the moment they reached here, and he wasn't going to back down. Hell, he was walking straight towards it for all he knows. The trio started walking once again, looking for a bar or tavern to find information, but all they could see was uneven buildings and hear noises. The clink of glass bottles, the cries of street vendors hawking their wares, and the raucous laughter of pirates filled the air. The walls of the buildings were coated in grime, and the ground was uneven, littered with discarded garbage and broken bottles. And every so often, a fight broke out between the pirates, but the city was so used to it that no one seemed to even bat an eye. As the trio continued walking, an old man, hunched and sickly, suddenly fell from his horse, collapsing in the middle of the road, right in front of them. His horse stumbled and fell beside him, its eyes wide with fear, before getting up after coughing some blood. The bustling crowd didn't seem to care much, as they walked around the fallen man, ignoring his pleas for help. "Huh? Who's he?" Nami questioned, backing away from the strange man. "Look, he fell off his sick horse," Luffy pointed out nonchalantly. "Yeah, he fell off his sick horse," Zoro spoke, agreeing with Luffy, as they both watched intently on the next move of the sick man. "You!" The fallen man groaned, coughing up blood on the streets, his droopy, tired eyes looking straight at Luffy, which was giving bad vibes to Luffy, who had stopped leaking his haki the moment he had promised to Nami to not cause any ruckus. "He's coughing up blood," Zoro pointed out this time. "Yeah, he's coughing up blood," Luffy repeated, happily playing along with Zoro. "You too. I'm sorry, but could you help me get back up?" The sickly man croaked, his voice was frail and his shaking hand extended towards them. It almost appeared that he was one step away from death. "You just don't want to stand up on your own, don't you?" Zoro's sweat dropped but nonetheless moved forward to throw the man back on his horse, which surprisingly held onto the weight of the sick man. "Allow me to thank you." The sickly man, trembling all over and hunching on his horse, whose name was ironically Stronger, spoke, extending his hand, holding a gleaming, red apple. "Here, have this apple, kid." He presented the apple towards Luffy with his eyes gleaming with something dark. "Yeah, that totally ain't suspicious. Move along, buddy," Zoro uttered with a sweat drop, standing between the man and Luffy. No way, was Luffy an idiot to take the apple too? "Free apple? Don't take that, Luffy." Nami was quick to yank Luffy away from the suspicious sick man, her instincts warning her something was totally wrong with the apple like Zoro. Luffy, still feeling a bit hungry but not trusting the old man, especially after feeling his malicious intentions, stared at the apple for a long moment before a pout formed over his lips. "It's no big deal. Keep the apple, sick guy," he said with a slight grin. "I'm not hungry enough to take something from a stranger." Luffy refusing free food and not fighting for it? A big sign of something being wrong. But Luffy of all people out there in the world, remembering stranger danger, has to signal the end of the world. "Luffy, are you okay?" Nami hurriedly checked over Luffy, placing her hand on his forehead and checking his temperature, which was slightly higher than his normal temperature. While Zoro stood there shocked, his jaw dropping as Luffy whined childishly at Nami's fussing. None of the trio, in the midst of their fussing and whining, noticed the old man's face fall, his grin tightening as his eyes narrowed darkly at Luffy, but he was quick to mask the change with another sickly smile and move away as his captain had ordered him. They can't show all their moves yet. After the fussing of Nami and worries of Zoro and whining of Luffy, the trio finally moved on, unaware of the danger they just narrowly avoided. But as they walked further into the town, a loud shout rang out from behind them. Someone exploded after eating that apple. The shout came from a nearby merchant, his face pale with terror. He pointed toward the crowd where the old man had disappeared, his voice shaking. That old man, he's trying to poison people. The air around them seemed to thicken with tension, but Nami, Zoro and Luffy all looked at each other, relieved that Luffy hadn't taken the apple. That was a close call, Nami muttered, eyes scanning their surroundings, searching for any signs of the sickly old guy who had disappeared. Luffy didn't reply, his eyes hovering over to the alley. The sick guy disappeared too. This was the second attempt on his life. Not that they would be able to kill him, but teach better prey to his demons to help him when they face each other, because no one could save him. Zoro, on the other hand, wasn't so sure of Nami's words. Sure, Luffy had avoided getting blasted, but it didn't mean he had to like it. That had been too close. The old man had left quickly, and something told him they'd barely escaped a bigger trap. His hand tightened around his swords. If this was a sign of things to come, they would have to be extra careful on this island. Well, Zoro said, his voice low. Let's keep moving. This place is getting weirder by the minute. The sooner they get any info on the Sky Island, the sooner they can leave the weird town. Yeah, Luffy chirped, enthusiastically leading the way happily once again. The trio soon found themselves standing before a lively tavern, the scent of grilled meat and the sound of boisterous chatter luring them side. They settled on the counter, placed their orders and began to enjoy their drinks and food, deciding to gather information after filling their bellies a little. Around them, the bar bustled with an unusual harmony of locals and pirates. The two groups seemed to coexist in a delicate balance, their loud conversations and hearty laugh overlapping without much conflict. But the calm bustle was shut down with a loud bang as the wooden doors of the tavern were slammed open and a spiky, blonde-haired man with a hyena-like grin strolled in. It's Bellamy, the hyena, someone whispered fearfully. The entire bar fell silent, save for the murmurs of the terrified patrons. Pirates and locals alike recoiled slightly as Bellamy scanned the room, his eyes gleaming with amusement. All right, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. I heard there's a pirate wearing a straw hat around here. Care to point him out? The crowd hesitated for a moment, before parting slightly, revealing Luffy sitting casually at the counter. He was entirely unfazed, his focused Solele hadn't noticed the growing tension. Bellamy's grin twisted into a sneer. So, you're the one they call Straw Hat, Luffy, huh? A bounty of 50 million berries. And this is what you look like? Ridiculously childish. Bellamy laughed, a sharp and cruel sound which echoed through the now silent tavern. He swaggered over, the crowd parting to let him through. Hey, Bearkeep, he called out, slamming a fist on the counter. Give me the most expensive bottle you have. A glass for me, and he spoke and then pointed to Luffy, who was curiously looking at him. One for my lil friend here. The barkeep hurried to comply, clearly wanting to avoid trouble. Bellamy grabbed his glass and shoved the second one toward Luffy, who paused mid-bite to glance at it with curiosity before raising it to his lips. But before he could even take a sip, Bellamy suddenly lunged forward, aiming to slam Luffy's head into the table. But his attack never landed. Luffy, quick as ever, dodged effortlessly, landing on Zoro's stool and plopping into his lap. Bellamy's grin vanished, replaced by a scowl as he realized his attack had failed. You little. Zoro, his patience already thin, grabbed Luffy with one hand to keep him steady while unsheathing his sword with the other. The blade gleamed dangerously as he pointed it directly at Bellamy's throat, his sharp gaze promising no mercy. And what do you think you're doing? Zoro growled, his tone low and threatening. Bellamy's lip curled in disdain. Are you the kid's babysitter? He sneered, looking between Zoro and Luffy, who was sitting casually on the swordsman's lap and had returned to sipping his drink and scrunching his nose at the taste before dumping its content on the floor. The drink tasted yucky, Luffy said simply, placing the glass back on the counter and resuming his meal as if he wasn't the center of the growing tension. Zoro's grip on his sword tightened, his glare sharp enough to cut through steel. You got 10 seconds to back off before I make you regret it. He was already not feeling good that the old sick guy had attempted to kill Luffy earlier. But now this, he for sure won't let the bastard touch his captain. But despite Zoro's threat, Bellamy wasn't backing down. If anything, the threat seemed to embolden him. What's a bounty kid like him even doing here? Huh? Probably some unwanted little brat with no parents to keep him out of trouble. Isn't that right, Straw Hat? The casual insult struck a nerve. Luffy's irises flickered to a dangerous shade of red as he glared at Bellamy, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by something far colder. Repeat that, Luffy said, his voice low and edged with a warning. Sure, Luffy's immensely loved by his dad and even brothers, but the fight with his mother recently and his real father, the freaking Almighty, who never pays attention to him, hurt damn bad. The shift in Luffy's mood was enough to make Nami and Zoro tense. They exchanged a quick glance, both knowing that Bellamy had unknowingly hit a sore spot. But Bellamy, oblivious, continued his taunts. What? Hit a little close to home. Kids like you, dreamers, are all the same. No family, no future. You think that bounty on your head means anything? It's just a price tag on a dumb little kid who doesn't know his place. That's enough, Zoro snapped, his sword pressing closer to Bellamy's throat. Bellamy stepped back with a laugh, raising his hands in mock surrender. Relax, swordsman. I'm just having a bit of fun. Besides, his eyes gleamed with an idea. A kid with a bounty like his would fetch a pretty price. Maybe I'll sell him to someone who'd appreciate him more. Someone like Doflamingo. That was the last straw. Luffy tugged down his hat, his jaws clenching and his ears momentarily catching the angry growls of the winds which wanted to tear the tavern down, tear the man who was insulting their king and bring them to his knees. Zoro. Luffy simply said, his voice calm but resolute. The swordsman smirked, understanding immediately. He adjusted his grip on his sword and faced Bellamy fully. You heard him. Time for you to leave, bastard. Bellamy's grin faltered, replaced by a scowl. You want to fight me over this, brat? Fine by me. Let's see what you've got, swordsman. Before the tension could erupt into a full-blown fight, Nami slammed her hands on the counter, drawing everyone's attention. Enough, she snapped, glaring at both Zoro and Bellamy before turning to the barkeep. She was angry at Bellamy for saying such words about Luffy, but right now they needed to find a way to the Sky Island too. We're here for information, not a bar fight, she said, her expression softening when she saw the flicker of sadness in Luffy's eyes before he nodded and held onto Zoro, keeping his promise to not start any ruckus. Barkeep, we want to go to Sky Island. Do you know anything about it? The question hung in the air for a moment before the entire bar burst into laughter. Sky Island, one pirate wheezed, clutching his stomach. Did you hear that? She actually believes that nonsense, another chimed in. Bellamy laughed the loudest, slapping the counter as tears streamed from his eyes. You gotta be kidding me. You're chasing dreams? What is this, the age of gold, Roger? The age of pirates who can dream is over. Nami's cheeks flushed red with embarrassment and frustration, but she stood her ground. The log pose is pointing up. It's proof. The log pose is pointing up. Do you even hear yourself? Bellamy cut her off with a mocking imitation. The trio didn't wait to hear more. Luffy tugged his hat lower, turning toward the exit. Let's go, he said, his voice firm. He wouldn't guarantee that the island would stay floating if he spent even a mere minute inside the tavern. Zoro growled and Nami seemed angry at the pirates, but none of them uttered a word as they followed Luffy out of the tavern, on the way of which, the patrons jeered and threw scraps of food and empty glasses at them. Zoro shielded Nami while Luffy dodged effortlessly, as they stepped out into the cool evening air and headed back to the ship. As they made their way out, the patrons jeered and threw scraps of food and empty glasses at them. Zoro shielded Nami while Luffy dodged effortlessly, the three of them stepping out into the cool evening air and heading back to their ship. The walk back to the Mary was far from peaceful. Nami had stomped ahead, her face flushed with anger as scraps of food and splinters of wood clung to her clothes and hair. Luffy followed behind, eerily quiet, while Zoro walked alongside him, his usual calm tempered by subtle glances at their captain. They're nothing but a bunch of rotten bastards. Mocking us and throwing garbage like that, Nami fumed as they reached the shore and were far away from the bustling streets crawling with lowly criminals and pirates. And you guys, what the hell was that? If you call yourselves men, you should unleash some whoop-ass when jerks come asking, got it? Nami snapped, turning to face Zoro and Luffy. Her temperament was nowhere near calm. You're the one who told us not to cause trouble, Zoro grunted, brushing the glass splinters from his clothes, while Luffy said nothing as he climbed on the ship with his straw hat tipped low to obscure his face. The past is for the past for a reason. Don't drag it out to the present, Nami shouted angrily at Zoro. Or I'll make you physically unable to bring it up. What's with those wounds? What happened? Usopp freaked out the moment Luffy landed softly on the deck and vanished to the men's cabin without a word. Nami, are you alright? Sanji came out rushing from the galley to see his beautiful Nami covered in food and glass splinters. And was that Mosshead, behind her with his face drenched in a sticky liquid? AGHHDOCTOOR, Chopper shrieked, leading Usopp to remind him that it was him, who is the doctor of their crew. Chopper rushed towards Zoro to give him a checkup and patching up his wounds, as even Nami disappeared in the woman's cabin, muttering something. Sanji, standing further back, clenched his jaw as he took in the sorry state of Nami and Zoro and after a moment, of Luffy, who came out of the men's quarters after washing his face and changing the clothes. What kind of trash town lets this happen? He questioned, his hand clenching on his cigarette the moment he saw the closed-off expression on Luffy and allowed Chopper to fuss over him. It's not worth it. Zoro answered as he looked at Luffy, who was sitting cross-legged near the mast, staring at the horizon with an unnerving calmness as his straw hat remained tipped forward to shadow his face. The only sign of his mood was the occasional tightening of his jaw and the winds that had been sweeping through the town and now across the ship, careful to not snap any rope or tug hard at the sails. Meanwhile, Nami stepped out of the bath with steam billowing around her as she dried her hair. The warm water had washed away the grime and splinters, but it hadn't done much to soothe her mood. The memory of those jeering voices and mocking laughter still clung to her like a stubborn stain. Dreams are for fools, Sky Island. What a joke. Their words rang in her ears, fanning the embers of her frustration. Pulling on fresh clothes, Nami muttered under her breath, "Stupid pirates. Stupid town." As she walked onto the deck, the afternoon breeze greeted her, but her eyes immediately landed on the quiet figure near the mast. Luffy sat cross-legged, his straw hat tipped slightly forward, staring at the horizon. Nami paused mid-step. Something about the way he was sitting, the stillness in his posture, made her chest tighten. She even noticed Zoro and Sanji stealing occasional glances at Luffy as if waiting for him to snap out of it. Nami's lips pressed into a thin line. Luffy's silence was unsettling and Zoro's watchful attitude only made it worse. She hesitated. A part of her wanted to leave him alone, to give him space, but another part refused to ignore the shift in his demeanor. But before she could make up her mind, the sound of footsteps drew her attention. My, doesn't things seem awfully quiet here?" Robin's voice was calm and composed as she emerged onto the deck, carrying a bag slung over her shoulder. Nami turned sharply towards Robin, her lingering frustration finding a new target. "Where the hell have you been, Robin?" she snapped, her hands on her hips. Robin raised an eyebrow at Nami's tone but didn't lose her composure as she spoke with a calm smile, not failing to notice the tension surrounding them all. "I was shopping for clothes and..." She reached into her bag and pulled out a rolled-up parchment. "To gather information about Sky Island." Nami's anger flared. "Sky Island again? You're the one who started this whole mess, and now you're off doing your own thing while we're..." She stopped herself, biting down on the words. Robin remained calm, as if she hadn't just been accused. "I found something useful," she said, pulling out a rolled-up map from her bag. "This is a map of Jaya. We're here in Mocktown, but on the other side of the island, there's an outcast named Mont Blanc Cricket. He was chased out of Mocktown for speaking of dreams. I thought he might be of interest to us." Nami stared at the map, her anger dimming but her frustration still evident. "An outcast," she repeated, frowning as she studied the map. Her frustration seemed to ease slightly, replaced by a glimmer of curiosity. "A man chased out of this town for talking about dreams." Robin offered a faint smile and handed the map to Nami. "Seems like we may have mutual interests, doesn't it?" For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind rustling the sails. Then, Zoro turned to Luffy. "What do you think, Captain?" Luffy's gaze didn't leave the horizon as he finally spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "Let's go." Cricket's lungs burned as he surfaced, the salty tang of the ocean filling his senses as he gasped for air. His latest dive had yielded nothing but debris, broken shells, rotting wood, and the mocking emptiness of the ocean floor. Gold, it seemed, continued to elude him. He wiped the water from his face, his sharp eyes narrowing as something caught his attention. The faint shadow of a ship passing overhead. A moment later, muffled noises reached his ears, carried across the water from his house. He frowned, instinctively clutching his spear. Intruders? His mind leapt to the worst conclusion. Thieves, likely from Mocktown, come to plunder what they assumed was his treasure. Without wasting a moment, Cricket lunged out of the water, his powerful frame cutting through the waves as he made for the shore. The adrenaline pounding in his veins drowned out the strain in his chest that had been bothering him for weeks. He reached the house in seconds, his muscles coiling as he launched himself toward the source of the noise. The first thing he noticed was a kid with a straw hat, who was curiously looking at him. Cricket didn't hesitate. He swung his leg at the intruder, aiming to knock him aside. To his surprise, the kid dodged with an almost casual ease, leaping back with a pound. Before Cricket could react, a blur of motion caught his eye, and the next thing he knew, a sharp kick landed against his side. He staggered, his teeth gritting as he turned to face the attacker. A blond man with a sharp suit and a cigarette clamped between his teeth. "Oi, what's your problem, old man?" the blonde snapped, landing lightly on the balls of his feet. "You pirates think you can just waltz in and take what's mine?" Cricket growled, tightening his grip on the spear. The blonde sneered, raising his leg for another strike, but before either could attack, a sharp, stabbing pain exploded in Cricket's chest. His breath hitched, his vision blurred, and his legs gave out beneath him. He hit the ground hard, clutching his chest as the world tilted around him. His heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, every beat a jagged stab of pain. He could hear muffled voices around him, distant and distorted, as his body gave in to the weight of exhaustion. When Cricket came to his senses again, he heard the familiar voice of Mashira and Shoju chatting happily with a childish voice. When he finally opened his eyes again, The familiar wooden ceiling of his house greeted him along with his throbbing head and the same ache in his chest which lingered like a dull, insistent drumbeat. "Diamond Head Mister is up," the childish voice pointed out, allowing Cricket to match the voice to the same kid who he had tried to attack before. But why was he, right now, treated by the very same people who were trying to steal his gold and whom he had attacked? Strange, truly strange pirates. "Boss, you're awake," a familiar, booming voice exclaimed, and Cricket turned his head to see Mashira and Shoju standing by his side, their faces filled with relief. Cricket groaned, trying to sit up, but a gentle, furred hoof pushed him back down. "Don't move too much," a soft voice said. Cricket blinked, his gaze falling on the strangest sight he'd ever seen. A small reindeer wearing a hat, holding a stethoscope in one hand, or hoof, rather. "What the hell?" Cricket muttered, his voice hoarse. "Relax," the reindeer said, his tone brisk but kind. "You've been overexerting yourself. You have diver's disease. Symptoms like chest pain, dizziness, and fainting spells happen when you dive too much without taking proper care of your body." Mashira and Shoju both looked alarmed. "You've been diving too deep, boss. We told you to take it easy." Cricket ignored them, his attention shifting to the group of strangers standing further back. The kid with the straw hat was there, along with the blonde man who had kicked him earlier, a swordsman with green hair, and a girl with orange hair holding a map. "Diamond Head Mister, I got stuff I wanted to ask," the straw hat kid exclaimed, stepping closer with an eager grin. "Who's asking?" Cricket frowned, his instincts still wary. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy, and we want to go to Sky Island. Teach us how." Cricket tunned by the sheer audacity of the request. "Sky Island?" He almost laughed, but the sincerity in the kid's voice stopped him. "You folks seriously believe in that?" he asked dryly, leaning back against the wall. "What was that?" the orange-haired girl growled with a mutterous glare, only stopped by the long-nosed teenager who was keeping her from reaching him in the lieu of him being a sick patient. "But Sky Island's exits," Luffy stated as if he was stating a fact not a myth. "We just need you to show us how to get there." Cricket sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He had no idea what to make of them yet. But the earnestness in the boy's words tugged at something Cricket hadn't felt in a long time. He glanced at the map they had, noticed the eagerness in their eyes, and sighed. "Let me tell you a story first." The room grew quiet. Even the monkey brothers, Mashira and Shoju, sat down, listening intently. "My name, Mont Blanc Cricket, comes with a heavy burden. You might have heard of my ancestor, Mont Blanc Noland." He pulled out a weathered logbook from a nearby shelf, running his fingers over its cover. "Noland was an explorer, a dreamer, and my ancestor. He discovered the legendary city of gold on Jaya and returned to his homeland with stories of wealth that could change the world. But when he brought his king back to see it," Cricket paused, a bitter smile crossing his face. "The city was gone. Sank beneath the waves. He was executed as a liar, and the name Mont Blanc became a curse. A joke." He lighted a cigarette, despite the frown on the doctor's face. "Growing up, I hated that name. People mocked me, called me a liar before I even opened my mouth. I wanted nothing to do with my family's so-called legacy." He leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling above. "So what changed?" the cook, Sanji, asked, his voice unusually soft. "That pointed about their knowledge that they knew that the very island they were on was the island which Noland claimed to have gold in." Cricket gave a dry laugh. "I ended up here by accident one day, chasing something completely unrelated. But as I stayed, I realized I couldn't escape it. This island was tied to my family's story, whether I liked it or not. Eventually, it became personal, not about proving Noland right, but about settling things between me and him." He spoke, getting full attention from his listeners. "I don't care if there really was gold or not. I didn't come here to find gold and clear up my ancestor's name. It's a personal fight between me and the man who had ruined my life." Cricket inhaled the smoke, allowing it to wash over him. "Before I kick the bucket, I want to settle the issue once and for all." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Nami spoke, her voice surprisingly gentle. "So that's why you stayed here?" While Usopp's cried at the story, murmuring about a true man. Cricket shrugged. "More or less." He stood up, stretching his arms. "But enough about me. If you're serious about reaching Sky Island, I can help you. It's not easy, though. You'll need guts, luck, and a hell of a lot of preparation." Nami's eyes narrowed. "We've got all of that. Just tell us what to do." Cricket smirked. He liked their spirit, even if they were crazy. That's why he told them about the phenomenon that occurs in the seas when the day turns night, about the Emperonumbus cloud where the Sky Island had to be, if it does exists. He told them about the knock-up stream which would throw them to the sky with the right timing and right force, but if not then they would end up dead. A part of him wondered if that would deter the pirates from believing on their crazy, foolish dream, and it did deter the long-nosed teenager, but the others didn't sweat a drop. "So we're gonna get blasted to bits if a single thing went wrong." The long-nosed teen, Usopp, trembled and shook in fear at the very thought of death. "Yes, if your ship would fail to catch anything up in the sky then your ship will come crashing down to a watery grave for all for your crew." Cricket announced, being frank and serious, while he watched as tears started falling from Usopp's eyes and stars started shining from Luffy's. Strange. Also, even the Emperor is located at the right spot. If it turns out the Sky Island doesn't exist, then again, the end result are your deaths. Hey, alright, we'll just give up on Sky Island then. Usopp's voice cracked as he tried to persuade Luffy against it. Right, Luffy? It'll be fine. Let's go. Luffy cheered, batting away Usopp and his insecurities to the corner.
It'll be fine. There you go again, making light of danger without even a shred of proof. Usopp cried in the corner. Just take a look at the poor going Mary for God's sake. Look how beaten and battered she is. There's no way she could stand up to one of nature's greatest calamity in her current state.
And true to Usopp's words, Luffy knew the fact that Mary's spirit was flickering. Even though they have kept her safe from harm's way, she just wasn't meant for the treacherous seas of Grand Line. Yes, it would be impossible for your ship even if she were brand new. It was Cricket who spoke this time, sparing a glance at the small caravel ship from the window. He spared a glance at Mishira and Shoju who seemed to like their dreamer guests. What, considering the speed, weight and strength? That ship of yours would be blasted into bits and pieces at the same time as the exploding stream. Cricket continued speaking, ignoring the angry glare which Usopp sent him. But don't worry about that point at least. Mishira and Shoju can guarantee your ship will stay intact on the ride up, by giving it the needed repairs and strengthening reinforcements, that is. Hell yeah, we can. Just leave it to us, the two monkey brothers reaffirmed happily. What about the time? When will the next knock-up stream occur? Robin asked the main question. Yeah, we need to leave this island in a day, so that our log doesn't get rewritten. Nami spoke, looking at her log pose. It should happen tomorrow around noon. Get ready if you're set on going. Cricket answered back, eliciting cries from Usopp. Clearly wasn't ready to risk his life so soon. The night was alive with the sounds of laughter and merriment. Around a roaring fire, the Straw Hats sat with Cricket and the Monkey Brothers, sharing food and stories. Plates overflowed with roasted meats, fruits, and the occasional exotic dish that Sanji had whipped up with whatever he found in the area. The air was light despite the looming challenge of the next day. Cricket sat apart from the group, his rugged hands holding Nolan's logbook. The weathered pages, thick with age and sea spray, seemed almost sacred as he flipped through them. Clearing his throat, he began to read aloud, his deep voice carrying the words into the night. And there it was, a city of gold, brighter than the sun itself, Cricket recited, his tone a mixture of awe and skepticism. Every brick, every tile, gleamed as if kissed by the gods themselves. The crew listened intently, Usopp nearly falling over as he leaned closer, while Robin smiled, her curiosity piqued. Even Zoro, usually aloof, seemed captivated by the story. Too bad it was all a lie, Cricket muttered, his voice tinged with bitterness as he snapped the book shut, or so everyone said. It's not a lie, Luffy grinned, his tone carrying absolute conviction. It's real, we're gonna find it. Cricket chuckled, shaking his head. You're something else, kid. After a moment's pause, Cricket gestured to a small wooden chest near the corner of the room. Mishira and Shoju eagerly brought it over, their movements brimming with pride. Cricket opened the chest, revealing a collection of golden artifacts he had dredged from the depths of the sea. See this? He held up a small statue shaped like a bird, its intricate details shining even under the flickering firelight. Proof that the Golden City wasn't just a myth. The crew leaned in closer, their eyes wide with wonder. Whoa, Chopper exclaimed, itching his cheeks. That's amazing. Cricket stared at the bird statue, his brows furrowing as if a sudden realization struck him. His eyes widened, and he abruptly stood up, startling everyone. I can't believe I forgot, he exclaimed, slamming the chest shut. You're gonna need a Southbird if you're serious about reaching that stream tomorrow. A Southbird? Luffy asked, his brow furrowed. Why? How do you plan to get to the knock-up stream? Cricket countered, crossing his arms. It's directly south of this cape. And if you think you can just follow the wind, forget it. This is the Grand Line. The winds and currents here don't play fair. Luffy's eyes lit up with understanding, but he didn't really need the bird as he has Halad's friends, the winds, to show him the way. After all, the winds are the best navigator out there. But this was his chance to finally see if the coward Teach would finally get out of his hidden spot. So, he grinned instead and jumped to his feet. I'll get the Southbird. What? Nami and Sanji shouted in unison, both moving to stop him. You can't go alone, Sanji growled. It's dark, and who knows what's in that forest. But Luffy was already darting toward the tree line, his straw hat bouncing on his back. I got it, he called over his shoulder. Luffy, wait! Zoro stood, hand on his sword, but Luffy disappeared into the shadows before anyone could stop or follow him. Luffy moved through the forest with quiet determination, his sandals crunching softly on the damp ground. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting eerie shadows that danced with the rustling of leaves. He could feel the forest watching him, animals peeking from hidden spots, their eyes glinting in the dark. Some seemed curious, inching closer as though tempted to emerge from their hiding places. He wondered if the Southbird would find him before he finds it. "So, Southbird, huh?" Luffy mused aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "How does it look?" Luffy wandered deeper, his senses tuned to the slightest sound or movement. The forest silence grew heavier, the tension thick in the cool night air. Suddenly, Luffy felt it. Faint but unmistakable ripples of haki along with Teach's. His eyes narrowed as he focused. 4 people. One a lot weaker than the rest, but he seemed to be closely accompanied by a creature. Maybe he could convince the creature to leave, though it would be difficult considering the strong connection between the man and the creature. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp shift in the air. His instinct took over as he ducked, narrowly avoiding a haki-coated bullet that ripped past his head and embedded itself in a tree behind him with a sickening thunk. His gaze darted toward the direction of the shot, his eyes sharp as daggers. "Sniper," Luffy muttered, clenching his fists, but before he could track him, the shooter was on the move, fast and unpredictable. Luffy didn't have time to focus before the sound of cracking wood reached his ears. His head shot up in time to see 2 massive apple trees hurtling toward him from above, their branches snapping as they plummeted. "Damn it!" Luffy hissed, leaping to the side. The trees slammed into the ground with a thunderous crash, shaking the earth beneath his feet. Splinters shot out in every direction, several grazing his skin. He barely had time to regain his footing before the apples fell from the trees. At first, they rolled harmlessly, but then, boom, boom. The apples exploded, one after the other, catching Luffy off guard as he didn't expect the apples themselves to be a weapon, sending fiery debris and shock waves through the clearing. Luffy instinctively coated himself in armament haki, bracing himself against the onslaught. Despite his defense, the force of the explosions hurled him backward, his body skidding across the forest floor. He coughed, the acrid smoke stinging his eyes, and quickly assessed his surroundings. It didn't take long for him to realize where he'd landed, or more importantly, who he'd landed near. The oppressive weight of a dark and overwhelming haki pressed against his senses. Marshal D. Teach. Luffy's jaw clenched as the towering figure emerged from the shadows, a sinister grin splitting his face and an awful sound erupting from his damned mouth. "Zee-ha-ha-ha-ha. There you were, Straw Hat." Teach's voice rumbled through the forest, sending chills up Luffy's spine. "Been waiting for you. Thought you could sneak around, huh?" Luffy's jaw clenched. His fists tightened, and his heart burned with anger as Teach took a deliberate step forward. Suddenly, a loud, guttural laugh echoed from somewhere in the trees. "Zee-ha-ha-ha-ha. Or should I say, Syra?" The sound grated on Luffy's nerves, and his teeth ground together.